วัสดีค่ะ
Welcome to my breakdown of episode 1 of season 3 of The White Lotus. Now, if you've been with the channel for a while, you know that I've been watching and covering this show since the very beginning, and I am just beyond excited to be your tour guide for this new season that takes us to Thailand. So let's admire the monkeys, and please don't eat from the pong pong trees, and let's break down this episode, spoilers ahead. We open this season with a shot of one of the local monkeys as we get this beautiful establishing shot, which just reminds me of how beautifully shot this show is, as we're introduced to Amrika and Zion, who are about to begin a meditation session. Now, Zion says that his mother sent him here to kind of unwind and relax because of some recent stress and because of school and finals, and you notice he pauses and says that he's also here because of some other stuff, definitely something to pay attention to moving forward. As they begin the process of finding silence, we see Zion suddenly hears gunshots in the background being fired and breaks his focus. Now, Zion tries to rejoin the session, but the shots are continuing and the sounds are getting louder and closer as he stops this session and they see people running around them and the shots hit them where they're at. Now, Zion says that his mom is out there, and clearly we can see he's concerned about her as the shots are getting closer to them as the instructor runs out of the way, but Zion heads towards the shots to look around for his mother. As he jumps in the water and starts looking around, he stops at a Buddha statue and prays for his mother's safety and to forgive him for his sins and to make sure that they both don't die. Now, after that quick prayer, we see that the shots actually stop as Zion notices a dead body floating around him. Now, I couldn't tell if his reaction was due to seeing a dead body. I mean, obviously it's not something you see every day, or if he might have met this person while he was in Thailand, like briefly, or maybe he personally knows them potentially, or just seeing this dead body gets him in the worst mindset and thinking about the safety of his own mother. Now, I thought this was a very impressive way to open up this new season and kind of throw us right into the mix. Compared to the other openings from season 1 and 2, you remember from season 1, we met Shane on his honeymoon, and we were led to believe that maybe his wife was the dead body being loaded into the plane. Now, compare that to season 2, where we remember we had Daphne who was taking a swim and she discovered the body of Tanya. And here we're essentially thrown right into the situation of the mystery death. And right now we're led to believe that the shots are associated with the person's dead body. And right now I'm thinking it's probably like some robbery gone wrong. But again, it may or may not be connected to why this person is dead in the water. Now, I'm not thinking Zion thought that that was his mother's body in the water, because he would have probably went towards the body instead of running away from the body. And we also don't know if the dead body was a male or a female. Now, of course, we get the confirmation later in this episode, but put that aside for just a quick moment and going by the opening scene, it was safe to assume that Zion was going to be revealed to be the son of the returning character of season 1 and Belinda, because a lot of the signs point towards that being the reveal. First off, he said he's from Hawaii, and we remember that Belinda lived there and worked there. He said that his mom was into meditation and spiritual things, and again, we know that Belinda was the manager of the spa and wanted to open up her own place. And lastly, I don't remember the full details, but I'm sure that she mentioned having a son finishing up high school in season 1, and obviously the big giveaway is that they share the same last name, so yeah, I probably should have started with that. Now, we cut to 1 week earlier, and to make it even more obvious that Zion being Belinda's son, the first person we see following that open scene is Belinda, or this could be the show pulling a bait and switch. Maybe it's actually not her son, but we know that it is. Either way, here we see the rest of the season's incredible cast. Now, we have 2 sets of couples this season in a friend group, starting with Rick Hatchett, who's traveling with his young girlfriend, Chelsea, which, by the way, shout out to Amy from Sex Education. I used to love that show before it went terribly downhill after the 3rd and 4th season. Now, you notice across from them is a couple giving them looks of judgment of Rick smoking and maybe also judging Chelsea for taking pictures, and that's Mr. and Mrs. Ratliff. Now, here we have Timothy, who's described as a wealthy businessman and vacationing with his wife Victoria and their 3 kids, Saxton, Piper, and Lachlan. Next, we have the longtime friend group, Kate, Jacqueline, and Lori, which shout out to Carrie Coon. I'm a big fan of her as an actress, and also this happens to be another great HBO show that she's a part of, the other one being one of my favorite shows of all time, and HBO's The Leftovers. Now, we see the start of this dislike between the characters Rick and Timothy, who get into a bit of a heated exchange because Rick doesn't want to put out his smoke, as we see Sexton has to step in to cool things down. Now next we meet the actual staff of the White Lotus this season. Here we have security guard Guydog, who sees Mook, who's a health mentor for the guests of the White Lotus, on the side of the road with her broken bike as he gives her a lift. Now as your tour guide, just taking a little detour here, who else watching this was vibing out to the song playing in the background during the introductions, and that song being 1984's Made in Thailand by Cristobal. I tell you what, there's two things you can always count on about this amazing show, and that is a beautiful scenery, incredible atmosphere, and the music is always on point. Now here we meet the general manager, Fabian, who tells, I believe it's Coon Skunnera, who's one of the owners of the White Lotus and pioneered this health wellness program, that the guests are almost here for arrival, but she's not ready yet because she has to impress one of her guests. Again, I cannot stress enough how beautiful this show is. Look at this shot here as they arrive and are welcomed to the White Lotus in Thailand. Now we see Chelsea makes Rick take the welcome gift as they're introduced to the owner. Now this may be from a biased point of view, but Fabian claims that their wellness is the best in the world. We see Chelsea complimenting Mook's beauty, who by the way will be their health mentor for the week, but we can see that Rick seems not to be so happy to be on this vacation, even though we later find out that this was his idea to come here. Now as we see, compared to the others, they're the only group who we don't find out what led them exactly to Thailand. Now you can't say that last part about the Ratliff family because they love to talk, and I bet Fabian regrets asking how they found out about the resort. As they're greeted next, I just know they're going to be so much fun to follow this season. I can just tell they're going to fill up the cup with drama and plenty of laughs. Now to me, Victoria and Timothy seem like the couple that love to brag and share unnecessary and unsolicited information to anyone they first meet. Long story short, we learn Timothy and his oldest son went to Duke, Victoria went to North Carolina, and their youngest just got accepted into both colleges. Now their reasoning for being here is because their middle daughter, who's a senior at North Carolina, is studying religion and writing a thesis on Buddhism and wants to interview a monk, and the parents decided to make this a family trip. You get a sense that Piper maybe didn't want to make this a family trip, but you also can make the assumption that her parents like to assert themselves into anything they want. Now, the owner clearly ain't got time for their life story and doesn't have any follow-up questions or shows interest in their family history, and you could tell that kind of bothered Timothy and Victoria. Now, we find out why the owner rushed off the Ratliff family because we watch her personally welcome the friend group because she and her husband are fans of Jacqueline, who's a star on television. Now, we learn that they've known each other since they were 9 years old, but they now live in different cities and their life has been really busy, but they want to use this trip as kind of a way to play catch-up. Now, as they're talking, in comes shirtless Valentine, who will be their health mentor for the week. Now, he's said to be the best of the best and gets requested by all the guests because he's Russian and handsome, says the owner. Now, the ladies seem very pleased with their health mentor, Valentine of the week. Now, first thing that came to mind after this interaction was, I wonder if any of them were married or in a relationship with a partner, and if single or if not, I wonder if they will have some interest in Mr. Valentine or any man of that matter on this vacation, and if any possible jealousy or temptations will come from it on this catch-up girls trip. Now, we see that Belinda is welcomed privately by Punchai, who she's been speaking to over the phone before arriving to set up a work program that would teach her some new tricks and techniques to take back to Maui, because remember, they said that they're the best wellness program on Earth. Now, taking a look at who I'm calling again right now, these set of characters will be the most fun and provide us with some of the most best standout moments this season as we take a look at the Ratliff family. Now, as they settle in, we learn that Saxon works for his father's company, and based on this episode, he most likely is a kiss up to his father and thinks that he's God's gift to women. Now, we also see that there is a sibling rivalry over the attention to who's going to bunk and hang out with their youngest brother on this family vacation. Now, they learn that they're staying at a digital-free villa that encourages their guests to be present and to focus on self-care and one another by releasing their electronics for the week. But luckily, it's optional, and besides Piper, they decide to hang on to electronics for the week. Now, Sexton seems to be a piece of work, but we get some potential foreshadowing here as he picks up a poisonous and deadly fruit to eat from the pong pong tree. Now, Pam tells him that the seeds are toxic and they can actually kill you, so that makes me think maybe that floating body that was in the opening scene may not have been shot and killed, maybe they ate the forbidden deadly fruit. Now, Victoria and Timothy aren't receptive to Pam's health plans for the week, who is going to be their actual health mentor for the week, by the way, as she goes over the test to set their personal health goals. But we see that Victoria heard the word test and about damn ran home after hearing that word, as Timothy lets Pam know how the tests and the goals will be going for the week. I'm going to call it now. I think Pam might be a sleeper as far as entertainment goes for us as audience for this season, and she may be this season's version of Armand, R.I.P. Now, catching up with Rick and Chelsea, she tells Mook all the places they've recently visited because Rick barely works and Chelsea used to be a yoga instructor. Now, Chelsea mentions that once Rick gets an idea in his head that it's hard to change his mind, as again, we see that he's not very friendly of a guy as he talks to Mook and asks if the owner is married, and he learns that her husband, who's very famous by the way, he recently went into the hospital but went to Bangkok, and we see that this was a disappointment for Rick. Now, I think we can all agree that there's something definitely mysterious going on with Rick, and he's got some type of situation going on that's very suspicious as we get this one-on-one scene between him and Chelsea. Again, he won't say why he's here and hasn't even told her why they're here, and he doesn't respond when mentioning why they couldn't go to Australia for some reason. Again, there's definitely something shady going on with Rick, and just speaking to this relationship so far, it seems kind of new, and it doesn't seem stable like at all, and there's no signs that they actually love each other. I wonder if there's a baby girl, sugar daddy situation going on between these two, because he doesn't seem all that interested in her as he has this look of concern on his face. Now, we see the friends are happy to be together and learn that Jacqueline actually paid for them to be here, which I definitely bet that comes up in some type of disagreement at some point this season. Reason I say that is because Kate mentions paying for their own treatments and offers to pay for some of Jacqueline's. I feel like Jacqueline paid for everything to cover up for the fact that they've had lost time and she wants everything to be perfect. And then on the opposite side, I think Kate may feel bad or doesn't want to give off the illusion that she needs help paying for things, and that's why she offered to pay. Now, Lori, on the other hand, seems like she's just happy to be here and away from her day-to-day life and happy to have a free trip and being with her old friends that I don't know if she actually is that close to them or if she ever was close to them, but maybe when they were younger. Now, there's some awkwardness when the topic of how they look being middle-aged women comes up and how great Jacqueline looks, and the conversation goes into plastic surgeries that they've had over time. Definitely can get the sense that there's some animosity within this group, and it looks like they haven't been around each other for a long time. And this, oh, it's so happy to see you, I love you, and this kumbaya is all a facade for now. I wonder if something happened between this group of women and why they were separated for so long, besides obviously, as they mentioned later, that Jacqueline got famous, but I wonder whatever that reason may be is what tore them apart for so long. Now, Belinda meets the rest of the staff, and we find out that she's been through some rough couple years, and she's very grateful for this 3-month program that opened up. Do you all think that she might still be upset from Tanya's false promises to helping her open up her shop? Which, speaking of Tanya, I wonder if she even knows that she died in season 2. Now, Belinda almost has a damn heart attack when she sees a monitor lizard running around, and she's told that over time she's going to probably become friends with the lizards. Definitely can see some callback to her to the local animals coming into play at some point this season. Now, here's where she meets Brahma, the creator and Hindu god. Now, as we'll discuss later, religion and spirituality will play a big role in this season. She learns of their customs, on how they feel that spirits are always surrounding them, and the importance of gifting offers for good luck and protection. I feel like this will come back into play at some point and being revisited by the opening shootout. You notice how Belinda bumps into her offering as we hear this ominous music play in the background? Is that a sign for dark times coming her way? Now, as we take another detour in this episode breakdown, I just have to point out the insane shot of the water floating on a leaf. Let's just collectively pause and appreciate the beauty of the show. And oh yeah, don't forget to hit that like button. Now, Godok appears to have a thing for Mook as he's questioning why she's taking interest in Hollinger's guards, who we learned from earlier is the owner's famous husband. She says that she likes the fact that the guards get to travel and they're paid very well. Now, my guy Godok is clearly in love, calling her princess and looking at her all deeply. Now, we know from the previous seasons that the workers' relationships are always fun to watch, but they never really have a happy ending. But I'm rooting for my boy Godok to get the girl of his dreams. They both seem like really nice people. Now, we see Sexton at the pool scouting for women and spots Chelsea, who pays him no mind. Now, I'm really interested to see if this goes anywhere this season because they're clearly close closer in age than her and Rick, and not saying that she's into Rick just for the money, which I think it is, but if so, I would imagine that Maxton got some credit cards in his wallet that he'll like to spend on her just to impress. Now we see Piper and Lock Key at a monastery, and she's nervous and doesn't want to go in as her brother decides to leave. Now I wonder where this hesitation stems from. Is she embarrassed of her family, or where she comes from, or it appears that she's considering making plans to change her religion, and maybe she's afraid of her parents' response and them not accepting her new religion, or maybe she's like thinking, hey, cultural appropriation. Like, I'm just this rich white girl coming here and trying to take on the culture. So again, I'm very curious on where the hesitation comes from Piper. Now, to my last point about Piper's interest in Buddhism, we see Victoria talking to her husband, and she mentions why they had to come this far, and she hasn't taken interest in her own religion. Again, this seems to be something that bothers them, and it seems to be like a sensitive subject matter about acceptance and identity. Now, we see that Timothy gets a missed call and listens to a voicemail from a Wall Street journalist. All signs to me that are pointing towards there being some money issues that are coming afoot. Now, back at the pool, the two brothers meet up as we see Sexton sets his sights on the women, or as he says, cougars. He introduces himself and recognizes that Jacqueline's from TV, but my guy ain't getting no play from any of the women so far, as Chelsea shuts him down quickly after he tries to flirt with her.
It's a numbers game, Locke. You gotta play the numbers.
Now, as it's now nighttime in the show, which tends to be the time of the show that brings out the toxicity and the drama and shows the worst within the characters. Taking a look at the Ratliff family first, we see Timothy isn't impressed with his daughter's efficiency in planning out things because she didn't lock in her interview with the monk prior to their arrival. Now, we see that there's a conflict cooking under the surface on where Lockheed's going to be attending college. Will he attend Duke like his father and older brother, or will he go to North Carolina like his sister and mother, who, by the way, she's whispering go to Tar Heels to him during this conversation jokingly. Now, I can see the pressure of him fighting over who he's going to spend time with on his vacation between his siblings coming up, but also his parents pointing him in the direction of what school they want him to go to, and also his sexuality comes up a little bit later in this episode. I can see all that coming ahead for young Lockheed this season, and he may blow off some steam in a very self-destructive way. Now, checking in with Rick and Chelsea, we get this funny moment where she's not that used to fine dining, as she is unaware of the taste this first before I give you a full glass method, as Rick just can't seem to find any peace or happiness here as he complains about the food options, again, even though he was the one to choose this spot for vacationing. I think this might be a little bit of foreshadowing going on, and I don't think this is a coincidence as we hear Chelsea mentioning that,
"No, I'm going to help you get your joy back."
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh. Good luck with that.
Even if it kills me.
As he leaves her at the table and heads back to his room. I bet you this lack of interest and also this level of distance he's creating between him and Chelsea will end up pushing her towards Sexton if he is persistent. Now, Timothy calls back the Wall Street Journal guy and asks him about some case involving a Kenneth individual and their relationship with the government with Brunei. Now, Timothy plays coy about the questioning and rushes off the individual off the phone, and he gives this look of like, oh shit, that whatever Kenneth situation finally came out from the dark into the light. Now, Timothy gives Kenneth a call, and he leaves him a voicemail with urgency to call him back ASAP. As him and Rick say some nice words to each other, again setting up this rivalry between the two, something that both seasons has always had is like two individuals that don't like each other coming to a head at some point in the season. Now, as Rick heads into his room, he's looking at photos of Jim and the owner of this White Lotus. Again, he's definitely up to no good. It's making me thinking that he's casing the joint, or maybe casing Jim, and maybe he is planning some robbery and he might be connected to what happened in the opening scene. Meanwhile, we see Chelsea meets a model by the name of Chloe, and they hit it off. She's lived here on the hill for over a year, and she's annoyed by her boyfriend, and is no other than the ex of Tanya, who played her for her money and also was a BLM member, and that's no other than Greg. Now, we end this premiere episode with Lori and Kate talking to Jacqueline about the inconveniences of being famous. Now, Kate claims that she knows exactly what it's like because back home in Austin, everyone knows her and her husband's company, and they just want to be her friend, but they only do that because they want something from her. Now, this confirms me mentioning if any of them are in a relationship, as we learn that both Kate, who has kids by the way, and Jacqueline are in a relationship, but it looks like Lori is the odd one out. Now, to me, it sounds like Kate is a stay-at-home mom, and Jacqueline we know is to be famous. Meanwhile, Lori works in corporate America and has a daughter, but it appears that she's not with the father. There's no doubt in my mind that at some point there's going to be a fight that's bound to erupt between these group of women. Kate to me seems like the annoying, look at me, I'm living a perfect life so far. Meanwhile, Jacqueline seems happy and famous, but definitely has some maybe Hollywood secrets in her closet. Maybe her show is coming to an end. Meanwhile, we have Lori, who's living a much different life than her other two friends, and she's working in corporate America. She's a mother again. I don't know if she's married or not, but we see her head back to the room, look at her friends, and she bursts out into tears. One would imagine that she's upset not being in the position of her friends, but I bet you they're just as depressed or secretly wishing they had a more simple lifestyle. Now, our final shots show Piper listening to a book while her brothers talk about her life choices. Now, I didn't think much of it earlier, but Sexton is a weird individual about his sister and talking about sleeping in different rooms because of their genitals, and now he's saying that his sister's pretty hot, but she might be a virgin. Now, as they go to bed, Sexton asks his brother what type of porn he's into as he asks the most important question of the episode.
Real question is, how the fuck am I gonna jerk off with you in here all week? Yeah, I'll just go to the bathroom.
That was just weird to me. And question for you all, is Lockheed attracted to his brother? Now we see Victoria in bed with her husband, hyping him up before they go to sleep, and he's talking about Rick most likely is jealous of him and his perfect life and his perfect family. But I don't think Timothy thinks so highly of himself, and whatever this Kenneth situation is, I think it's gonna come back and break this perfect life he's built as we end this incredible premiere episode. Welcome to my breakdown of episode 2 of season 3 of The White Lotus. Special Treatments is the title of this episode, and it perfectly describes how many of these characters are treated. Now, it took them almost dying to switch up, but we saw Rick being kind to Chelsea. We also saw Mook showing concern for my guy, Guydoc. But you know who isn't getting the special treatment that they've probably been used to? Well, that's Timothy, who finds out that the storm he's been trying to avoid is heading towards him and his family, and it looks like they're not going to be getting their happy ending. There is a lot to go over in today's breakdown, so without further ado, let's discuss this episode. Spoilers ahead. We open this episode with the perspective from what feels like someone watching from the water from a distance away from the White Lotus. It almost felt like someone was swimming or thinking what happens to Timothy in this episode. Maybe you would say it feels like someone was drowning and watching from afar. As we continue from the previous night of the last episode. I could be wrong, but I don't ever recall an episode picking up from a previous scene into the next episode, but here we are as we see the conversation between Kate and Jacqueline. Last week we talked about the friend group being here to catch up with one another, and in this opening scene, we get a more of an understanding of how often they've kept up with each other over the years. Now, Jacqueline mentions how much better it is for them to be together versus over the phone, and Kate says that they really only see each other twice a year for dinners, but it's only between them two. As Jacqueline reveals that it's been over 4 years since she's seen Lori. As both seem to agree that Lori looks great, and they talk about her great energy and how much of a hard charger she is, and just overall a great person and a friend. Now, in this moment, we do get confirmation about the relationship status between Lori and her ex-husband, as they have gotten a divorce, and according to these two, it was pretty nasty. Now, we find out that Lori actually pays palimony to her ex, and they mention how he's been taking advantage of her financially over the years. Now, here is where the gossip comes in, because Kate talks about Lori's daughter, Ellie, and how she's taking her parents' situation hard, and Kate insinuates that it's the reason why she's been kicked out of 2 schools, to Jacqueline's surprise. Now, to me, this kind of insinuates that Kate's probably more involved in Lori's life more than Jacqueline has been over the years. Now, Kate goes on to describe Ellie as a hitter and a bruiser, and she even throws furniture. Now, Kate seems to have a dislike for the East Coast or the idea of living in a big city in general, because she shares her opinions on parents raising their kids in New York, and that adding to one of the reasons of Ellie's behavior. Now, Kate really seems to have an image of Lori, as she goes on to say that she's always been defined by her work, and that's good for her. And this leads to Jacqueline bringing up a time where Lori talked about getting this big promotion that never seemed to happen, and that they basically say that she peaked at the firm that she works in. Now, remember 2 seconds ago, they were both talking about Lori's great energy. She looks good, everything's going good with her, she's great. But now the real truth about how they feel, or at least Kate feels, who says to Jacqueline,
"No wonder she looks defeated. I thought you said she looked great."
Wow.
It's so funny that Jacqueline even said, "I thought you said that she was all good 2 seconds ago." It's crazy how they initially talk so nice about Lori as if someone else was in the room and asked them about her, and they did the fake pleasantries, but once that person left, they really showed how they felt. Now, Kate double downs and says that Lori looks tired, and Jacqueline agrees, and she throws in her 2 cents and blames it on the drinking, especially after she drunk a whole bottle that same night. Now, I would be lying if I didn't admit that when Lori banged on that glass, that damn near had me jump out of my seat and I nearly made a sound myself. Now, Lori briefly joins them, and yes, it seems like the drinking of the bottle has affected Lori because she clearly is drunk as she comes down to get her charger. Now, Jacqueline tells her that they were just talking about her and how great she looked, and Kate and her talk about how they're gonna have to fight over her for the week because they're just so excited to be together. Now, taking a look at this scene, look, it's not the most terrible thing that happened because I think we've all been in this moment. Whether it's a family member or a friend or your partner in life, we've all been Kate and Jacqueline speaking about a person that we care about, but that doesn't protect them from this kind of behavior where we share their flaws or gossip about whatever situations, good or bad, that they find themselves in. But my biggest takeaway from this scene is that it's possible that Kate and Jacqueline may be closer as friends than either one of them are to Lori, especially after mention that they see each other for dinner at least twice a year, and Jacqueline hasn't even seen Lori for almost 4 years. Which makes me wonder what exactly about Lori got her into this circle of friends. Could it be that Lori's always been like the additional tag along for them, or someone they bring along to maybe look at and see as a kind gesture to someone around that's less than? Now, I'm sure Lori offers more to them than that, but again, it just feels like she's the outsider of the group so far. I also want to point out the possibility of Lori's drinking being an issue at some point this season, but also mentioning how they thought a monkey banged on the glass, and see this shot of the statue of the monkey here where there's some interesting dramatic music playing in the background. Now, as we'll talk about in this breakdown, there were a lot of monkeys in this episode that were looking from afar, and we'll talk about what I think that means, but I want to call back to remembering the very first shot of this season, which had a monkey in it. Now, putting an emphasis on the word shot, I wouldn't put it past Mr. Mike White, who we know is the creative behind this show. I wouldn't put it past him if he has monkeys maybe being responsible for the shooting that we heard in episode 1 opening scene. I just have a feeling that monkeys will play a very big role in this season. Now we cut to the next morning where we see these beautiful shots into our characters waking up. From seeing Piper doing her morning yoga into a picture of Saxon's ass and Locke waking up looking directly at it, into seeing our other couples waking up, including this shot of Rick trying to move Chelsea's arm off his chest, but she refuses to move. Now we'll be discussing it in today's breakdown, but he just seems so unhappy with her in this relationship, but things will change by the end of this episode. Now we see our staff arriving to work as Gaidak and Mook say their hellos, and she thanks him for fixing her bike. Now Gaidak invites her to lunch later and wants to tell her something that he wants to share with her. Now I just have to say, I never heard or known who Lisa, who plays Mook, was prior to this show, but man, do I know now, because my comments here seem to be very excited to see her, but also the internet in general seems to be very excited and shares that same sentiment. Now, with this being her first acting gig, whether it's episode 1 or what she does in this episode, she's been pretty impressive so far, and I'm really excited to see what she does this season, and I'm going to have to check out her music someday. Now, at breakfast, we check in with the Ratliff family. Now, Timothy mentions how he didn't sleep well last night, and Victoria says that he should have taken her lorazepam. Now, this drug is said to help those who suffer from insomnia, but also, if you Google it, the thing that caught my attention was it saying the following. Now, the drug is said to cause paranoia or suicidal thoughts and impaired memory and judgment and coordination. Now, here's a key part here. Combining other substances, particularly alcohol, can slow breathing and possibly lead to death. So my question is, will someone in this family take this drug other than Victoria without knowing its side effects, and could it cause this season's big death? Also, I won't dismiss Victoria herself mentioning that it helped her sleep like a corpse. maybe insinuating that it could be her that died at some point in this season. Now, Timothy mentions that he's not a fan of taking any drugs, as Saxon, being the kiss up that he is, agrees that he doesn't use them either, but Piper calls him out for taking Adderall all the damn time. Now, Piper mentioned how she wasn't the one who chose to stay at the White Lotus and how she feels about its guests.
It's like a Disneyland for rich bohemians from Malibu in their Lululemon yoga pants.
Now, just as she says that, in comes Kate in her yoga pants, which I'm assuming are Lululemon. She comes up to the table because she recognized Victoria. They attended a baby shower together for a mutual friend in Austin, and while Kate remembered her name and everything, we see Victoria had no memory of them spending time together over a weekend. I guess we can thank the drug for that memory loss. But there may be more to Victoria's reaction than the effects of the drug, because Kate introduces her to her friends and she says that she'll make sure to tell their mutual friend that she said hello, but Victoria seemed very unbothered by everything going on and made it very awkward. Now, Kate returns to her friends, and I got a kick out of their reaction to Victoria's response, and Jacqueline says that Victoria seems to be a little crazy. But I also really appreciate that Lachlan acknowledged the awkwardness, but also his mother's standoffish and kind of rude attitude towards Kate. Now, Victoria claims that it was over 10 years ago and plays off the interaction to just not knowing each other. I wonder if there's a possible beef there. Did something bad happen over the weekend between the two characters? Either way, I really hope that we get to see more interactions between these two, because that was pretty damn funny. Now, Saxon tells his mother who Jacqueline is, and she says that,
Oh,
She's famous.
should I be impressed? Actresses are all basically prostitutes.
and we see everyone in the family gets a kick out of that joke, except for Piper, again showing that she may not share similar feelings that the rest of her family does. Now, Mook checks in with Rick and Chelsea to confirm their morning plans, some in which Rick didn't sign up for, but Chelsea did, which is him to attend a stress management session. Now, Rick gets even more unwanted news without his permission, as Chelsea tells him about the dinner they're attending with Chloe and Greg. Again, we see Rick noticing the owner, and I'll be sharing my very, and I mean very, interesting theories about his interest in her a little bit later. Now, back with the friends, we see Valentine checks in with them on their morning plans, and Kate and Jacqueline thinks that this is the perfect opportunity to Lori to take a chance with hooking up with him, and based on her pulling her shades down, it definitely seems like something that might happen at some point this season. Now, checking in with Belinda and Punchai as they begin their lessons of showing their signature treatments. Now, I might be wrong, and I'm going to put a spoiler warning up there now for those that maybe didn't see the most recent trailer of the show. So again, I'm warning you all for a possible spoiler. But based on the trailer at the end of last week's episode showing the weeks ahead, as you all can see on the screen now, it seems like Belinda and Punchai are sharing some moments here, and it appears that they might hook up and develop a romantic relationship at some point, and this episode definitely seems to show Belinda's romantic interest in him. Now, here we get another reference to Victoria and her taking drugs. Now, we don't hear the name of this drug. I don't know if it's the same drug that was mentioned earlier at the breakfast table, but she says she's taking this drug now during her massage because it makes her feel more comfortable and more relaxed. Again, it definitely seems like drugs that she takes or someone else takes seems to be setting up something for later. Now we head over to CM Piper, who's yet again doing yoga. She officially encounters one of those LBHs that Chloe told Chelsea about, as he just can't seem to stop looking at her and makes it very obvious and very uncomfortable for her. Meanwhile, we see Lachlan in a sensory deprivation tank, and we also see Sexton being a certified weirdo as he gets an erection during his massage. Now, during all this, we check in with Timothy, who calls his office, and they still haven't heard from Kenneth. As Timothy learns that the situation back home is getting out of hand because now the Washington Post is involved. Now, here we get the title of the episode being shown as the characters experience the pleasures of the world's best treatments. From seeing Lori with Valentine, where there's some flirting going on, as you'll notice the lingering hand he puts on her shoulder, and he's giving her numbers that he says are of numbers of a woman half her age, which we find out is a common pickup line that he uses pretty frequently. We also see Belinda and Punchai to Chelsea, and here we have Tim, who isn't quite enjoying his current situation. Now we see him on a treadmill, increasingly going faster, which to me could symbolize him running from this oncoming storm headed his way from back home with his Kenneth case. Again, we see this shot of a monkey who's always watching from afar and could be a representation of us as the audience watching these characters. Now here we see Rick with Amrita, who we last saw in the flashback shootout with Zion. Now Rick opens up a bit and shares his current high stress levels, and the question comes up about a time when he can remember being stress-free and maybe when he was a younger age, as he responds by sharing his mom OD'd when he was 10 and that his father was murdered before he was even born.
I never had an identity. I don't need to detach. I'm already nothing. If nobody puts gas in the tank is empty. That's not an illusion. The car won't start. Nothing comes from nothing, right?
A very dark and pessimistic viewpoint about himself, which just makes him, again, the most mysterious character so far in the early parts of this story. Is what he said about his mother and his father true? And if so, does that explain why he is the way he is? Now, he mentions that he's a weed smoker and he's looking for a connect, and putting our drug conversation from earlier into the equation, could this need of drugs lead him to one of the members of the Ratliff family? Now, this is an interesting scene with these characters, Piper, Sexton, and their mom. As she's ordering food, we see Sexton in the background making a bunch of noise as he says that he was disappointed by the massage he got because it didn't end in a happy ending.
Aren't they all supposed to be a little special?
Definitely an inappropriate moment by him, and not only him saying that, but also remembering that he did get an erection when he was getting a massage. Now, it was interesting going back to Victoria's comments earlier about actresses being prostitutes, because in many places, offering happy endings is illegal and considered a form of prostitution. Now, in comes Timothy storming in. He's pissed by the time difference, and we get one of the funniest line deliveries by Victoria so far.
He works so hard. He needs to calm his ass down.
Now it's time for Belinda to share her talents with her massage treatments, as she's impressed by Pungchi's and another funny moment here.
Or on my stomach.
On my stomach, not my stomach, your stomach.
Yeah, we know where her mind's at, and again sets up the possible romantic tension between these two characters. Now let's talk about the lunchtime with Mook and my guy Gadak. Now Gadak seems like a good catch for anyone, man. Like, so far he seems very kind and respectful, and he even knows how to cook, which to everyone out there, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for your partner to know how to cook? Comment below. Now he gets into the thing that he wanted to share with her, and it's that he likes her, which is something that I mentioned back in episode 1 because it was pretty damn obvious. Now Mook initially laughs it off, but let my guy explain his feelings. He mentions how their families already know each other, her brother's a fan of him, they work together, they come from the same neck of the woods, and he compliments her intelligence. I mean, my guy is saying all the right things. Look at the honesty too. He says that he might not be as smart as her, but at least he's a handy guy. Now, Mook brings up the point that they've never been on a date before and kind of insinuates that she doesn't really look at him that way and she doesn't want him to make it weird. I feel bad for my guy because I think we've all either have been in a situation or at least know someone that's been through this exact same thing where you've known someone for so long that they're basically family and that other person sees you as just that, like a brother or a sister, but you feel differently about them. So it's going to be interesting to see if Mook changes her mind at some point, especially after what happens to him later in this episode, or if this now being out there that he likes her will change the dynamic moving forward. Now Rick and Chelsea talk about his session with the wise Indian woman, as he puts it, and how he won't be returning. Now, yes, has Chelsea been a bit forceful by trying to bring back his joy, and I'm starting to think that he never had joy to begin with, but calling her an idiot was just extremely rude to me, and again just makes me wonder what she sees in him. But in comes Chloe, who's looking great by the way, as Chelsea and her are going to be hanging out for the rest of the day, leaving grumpy grandpa to take a much needed nap. Am I being too harsh on Mr. Rick? Like, if the story is true that he lost his father before he was born and lost his mom when he was 10, as he described earlier in the episode, and look, not making excuses for his a-holery attitude, but it could explain his actions, but also it could explain his lack of affection and love towards Chelsea. Okay, I might have been wrong about the 2 versus 1 idea between Kate and Jacqueline, with Lori being the odd one out, because this scene may have said otherwise. Now, the conversation about their sessions with Valentine comes up, and Lori realizes that all the compliments he said to her was what he said to Jacqueline, But the conversation switches to their appearances and body fat, and Jacqueline being shocked that her and Lori share a similar fat percentage. Then Jacqueline continues this almost body shaming innuendos when saying that Kate's body readings were average because the fatty foods in Austin, instead of saying the opposite thing. Then she brags about her husband of 1 year, whom body is crazy and catches so much attention from others, and how addicted they are to one another. This might be the first time Kate's been perturbed by Jacqueline, and I can see how compliments about her weight and her looks being mentioned a few times so far being a talking point between Lori and Kate, and again, starting up this tension between them. All we need now is Jacqueline and Lori to find something to bond over about Kate, and things were really good going. Now, speaking of rude, we see Chloe and Chelsea discuss their boyfriend's attitude towards them, as Greg's way of apologizing is giving away Tanya's money for Chloe to spend. By the way, Chloe and Greg, was she the one that he was on the phone with at the end of season 2, episode 2? Go back and watch that scene, but basically it was him on the phone saying that Tanya was clueless, and he said that he loved whoever was on the other line and that he would be home soon. So was Chloe in on the scheme, or is she his next target? Now, as the afternoon winds down, we get into a scene between Piper and Lachlan. Now, he mentions that he tried praying in the tank, and Piper takes a lot of interest in him talking about this subject matter. He says that it felt like he was talking to himself and didn't feel any higher power present, but Piper explains how she feels when she does her praying.
I do.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Don't you feel like that could just be like wishful thinking, like you want to feel something, so you...
It's real.
She shut that down very quickly, but it does beg the question on her beliefs and how there are people in the world that want something so badly to believe in that they force themselves to thinking that they have some connection to some higher power. Locke takes this silence between them as an opportunity to bring up what him and Saxon talked about the other night about her not having sex. Now, he goes over the conversation with her, and she digs for more answers about the conversation, and Locke replies by saying that it was said as a compliment, but Piper takes it as for the weird remark that it was, and to make matters worse, Lachlan proceeds to ask if she's actually had sex, which causes Piper to leave this whole conversation. Now, we discussed this last week, and I saw in the comments that some of you all interpreted their dynamic differently than I did, of how I felt like it was like a very weird relationship between the three, and some of you all felt that Lachlan and her were victims of their older brother. Now, I'm not saying that anyone was right or wrong at this point in the story between the relationships, but after this scene, let me know if you feel like it was a change in your viewpoint on how Lachlan is questioning his sister's sexual experiences. By the way, comment below. I guess it depends on the situation and the relationship, but is it weird for siblings to discuss sex with each other, especially when it's the opposite sex? Now, yet again, we have a monkey, and it feels more like it's supposed to represent us from going from one character to the next character, and they're always present as we cut to seeing Chelsea and Chloe shopping. Now, during this, we see Godot getting invited to a fight of a friend of Valentine who's going to be involved in the fight. Now, unfortunately, this conversation distracted my guy Godot from his job as a truck drives by and the people inside rush through the gates and ended up robbing the store that Chelsea and Chloe were in. Now, they take some jewelry, and as they get back to the gate, the one with the gun gets into a scuffle with Godot and pistol whips him, and they get away. So let's take this from the top. Was Valentine a part of this robbery? He just so happens to be leaving and talking to Gaidak, which led to the gate being open and Gaidak not taking a chance to speak to them. Now, as far as the robbery goes and the person involved, their face was covered with a mask and they had glasses on, so it was hard to make them out. But you also notice that they made sure to not speak so loudly. Obviously, they don't want to attract any attention towards them, but it almost felt like there was a moment between the person and Chelsea, almost like they didn't want her to recognize their voice, which makes me believe, was it possible that that was Rick or maybe someone we met so far in the show? Now, lastly, during that scuffle, there was another man in the car and we get a brief shot of them from behind. So going back to Valentine, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a connection between him and the robbers, and I wouldn't be surprised if when we see Gaidak go to the fight that maybe the fighter is the one that was involved in the robbery, or at the very least, I bet Gaidak sees one of them at the fight and it'll be revealed that one of them were actually involved. Either way, I doubt this is the last time that we've seen of these criminals and having some consequences moving forward. Now, I want to think that the behavior and the sense of urgency to speak to the owner and casing out the husband is all a red herring for Rick, but look at his face in this scene. Is this a face of a person that's genuinely concerned for his girlfriend who just experienced a robbery and had a gun pointed at her face? Or is this the look in the face of a man who just committed that crime and does indeed have nefarious plans ahead? Now on to the back half of this episode as we lead into the night scenes. Now Mook shows her worriedness towards Tak as she checks in on him, and he's feeling a lot better after she rubs his arm and gives him this look here, and especially after she calls him brave. My guy might have to call those robbers back if this is the kind of attention he's going to get from her. But in all seriousness, I do think we can expect Guy Doc to take things more seriously, and not saying that he didn't before. I bet that he's going to probably beef up the security to ensure that this doesn't happen again, especially if it concerns the safety of Mook. Now at dinner, Chloe makes a joke about missing out on the action as Chelsea and Rick's room is now comp for the situation. Now not only did we see the kindness from Rick earlier in the scene, but he continues to show this kindness to her and thanks her for doing a good job of getting their room comped, and he also calls her babe. It looks like all it took for him to be nice to her was to have a gun pointed in her face as Chelsea encourages Rick to interact with Greg. Now we see him listening to Chelsea, and he makes some small talk with Greg as he asks him about his occupation, in which he tells him that he's retired. Now Rick follows that up and says, well, what did you do before that? And we see Greg tells him, well, he did a little bit of this, a little bit of that, leaving out the part of him scamming people. Now Rick asks Greg and Chloe how they met, and they say that they met through a match service in Dubai. Now, I'm really torn about whether she was a part of the Tayme situation because Chloe acted very sus when Rick asked where they met, and it seemed like they just had to make up a story on the fly. But then the other side of me thinks that maybe this is real, that she might be a hooker that Rick talks about later, because when Chloe and Greg were fighting about if she was French or Canadian, you know, that seemed like an actual fight. That seemed like there was like a fight with a new couple that really doesn't know each other. But again, the situation could be true, or the bickering over, again, where she's from might be all a part of their ruse. Now look, if Saxon couldn't be more of an asshole, we get this scene where the waitresses come to get the plates off the Ratliff's table and Locke questions if the women were transgender, and Saxon makes a very off-colored joke about the trans community in Thailand.
Well, you know what they say. Having sex in Thailand is like eating a box of chocolates. You never know which one's gonna have nuts.
Of course, you all can do your own research, but Thailand is a very popular destination for the trans community, but like most places, still unfortunately experiences discrimination and have very limited rights. Now, as far as the story is concerned, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up seeing Saxon, who just seems to be extremely horny at this point. He might end up having sex with a transgender and is very aware of that, but even bringing it to Lachlan, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Lachlan having some type of interaction with the trans, and I feel like we're going to see him exploring his sexuality and seeing what his sexual preferences are. From here, we see Piper is just tired of her brother's actions and alludes to the conversation she had with her younger brother earlier, but we see the parents step in and try to calm down their, back and forth bickering as Victoria gives them a bit of advice that to me speaks to their privileges of coming from money. Now, during all this, we see Tim finally gets information he's been waiting all day for. Now, this is a big moment here because we see Belinda notices Greg across the way, and this to me sets up a plot that I think we've all been waiting for, and that is Greg getting what he deserves for what he did to Tanya. Now, here we get maybe one of my favorite moments of the episode. It's definitely a moment that stuck in my head as we see Shatala performing an absolute banger of a song. I do want to point out Rick, who again is just staring at the owner, Shatala, and it hit me in this moment, and I'm going to share a pretty wild theory with you all. Stick with me. Now, we know that Shatala used to be famous back in the day as a singer and an actress. What if Rick somehow got a hold of her older movies and he would watch them as a kid, and it was his way of bonding with her as kind of like a mother figure, because we know he didn't have one after the age of 10. And I think he's here to thank her for all the good memories, or as it appears in the trailer of last week, he wants to do a project with her.
I am in the entertainment business, working on a project in Bangkok. I know you used to be an actress.
I was.
Oh my god, you're gonna do something fucking stupid.
As he listens in to her telling her friends that she's leaving to go to Bangkok tomorrow because of her husband's recent stroke. Now, as we come to end this episode, we see Timothy finally speaking to Kenneth.
What exactly do they know?
They have everything, Tim.
Man, the FBI is now involved and they know everything, and Tim's worst nightmare comes true as he is wrapped into this money laundering bribery situation. Now, Timothy says he only made $10 million from this scheme and threatens to kill Kenny, who says that he'll do him one better because he'll do it himself, as they hang up the phone. And wouldn't you know it, Godot just happens to have seen this whole conversation, and it's safe to assume that without context, he most likely is going to think that the conversation was about the robbery that happened earlier in the day, and now sees this guest in Timothy, or maybe the whole family, being involved. Again, I've lost count of how many monkeys showed up in this episode, but we have one here, and we also end where we began with our friend group. As Jacqueline heads to bed to read Shatala's book, you notice how Jacqueline looks at the front of the book and also the back of the book. The back of the book is young Shatala from her past, and the front of the book is her present. To me, this was symbolic to Jacqueline's mindset of her being a aging star. All the talk of her body fat being low and her young husband and all that is definitely opening the door to her character leading towards a character who's suffering from identity issues and having to live up to her younger self and chasing the past and not embracing herself now. Now back in the living room with Lori and Kate, and like I said was gonna happen, these two toxic bonding over Jacqueline. They talk about her competitiveness and also being a narcissist, as Kate brings up her vanity, and another hilarious line here by Kate describing Jacqueline's face.
Veer, did she sandblast her face or something? It's very waxy.
They talk about her husband and them possibly not living in the same city, and Jacqueline being lonely and believes it's all a front. As they say, the bigger the front, the bigger the back, which I've never heard before, but I might actually have to pull it out one day. Now, Jacqueline overhears the whispering in the other room, and man, the tables have turned in 24 hours from Kate and Jacqueline gossiping over Lori, and now we have Lori and Kate gossiping over Jacqueline. As we end with Chelsea and Rick, who's cracked the case with Greg and Chloe calling her a hooker. And like I said earlier, he might be right, and it could play into my thoughts about her being involved with Tanya's death. Now, Rick tells her that he's going to Bangkok in the morning, as we know that he's going there for Shatala and her husband, but it hit me in this moment, yet again, a crazy theory, stick with me. What if Jim, her husband, had something to do with his father being murdered and he's seeking revenge? But look, talking about a difference of 24 hours, we see Rick and Chelsea sharing the most intimate moment yet between the two. As we end this episode with Timothy calling to obtain a lawyer for the shitstorm coming his way, or should I say tsunami coming, as he watches his family walk inside, and just so happens that Locke talking about a storm that came through and nobody listened to the warnings, a perfect illustration of what Timothy is going through in this exact moment. Welcome to my breakdown of episode 3 of season 3 of The White Lotus. The meaning of dreams is the title of this week's episode, and look, it perfectly describes how I was dreaming, wishing this episode was more exciting. No, but jokes aside, this wasn't my favorite episode thus far, but there's still a lot to discuss with everything going on with Rick having a bad trip. We have Belinda setting her sights on Greg Gary, and Timothy does his best to avoid the shitstorm at his front door. Let's get into my breakdown of this episode, spoilers ahead. Now, talk about dark and ominous as we open this episode with seeing this dream that Victoria's having, where she's on a beach and she sees Lachlan with the two waiters from last episode and him saying that this is what it looks like before the tsunami. Now, Victoria wrapped in blankets, and we see her walking towards the tsunami as she eventually awakens. Now, to me, this could be read as Victoria speaking to her own intuition about everything going on with the case with Kenny, even though she doesn't know what's going on, but that makes me think that she also is probably hearing the conversation that Tim is having on the phone, and what is being discussed over the phone is seeping into her subconscious while she's in and out of sleep. Now, the visuals being a metaphor for the calm before the storm and her walking towards it. But speaking to Victoria seeing her son with the two trans women that we saw in last episode, could that be foreshadowing for later? Now, outside we see Tim's on the phone with a person by the name of Joe, who I'm assuming is his lawyer, as he gives him the rundown of everything. Now, according to the subtitles, Tim says that him and Kenny first met up 15 years ago, and he worked at a Markham Bradford in the division in Asia. Now, Tim says he helped Kenny out, set up some fun by the name of Show Cow, and it sounds like there's a lot more to the story that Tim left out. Again, outside, we see that it's raining and storming, and basically this is the through line of the visual language and symbolizing what's coming towards the Ratliff family and maybe others in the show as well. Now, at breakfast, we see our friend group being greeted by Shatala and Fabian, and Rick watches and sets his course on finally speaking to her. Now, Victoria shares her dreams with her family, and Piper suggests that it could be a warning. Meanwhile, her other brother suggests otherwise.
So, dreams predict the future now.
It's the collective unconscious.
Yeah, and we all dream about fire and snakes because we're all afraid of fire and snakes. I mean, it's not that deep.
Now, we see that Tim's phone is blowing up at this point, and he's just continuously ignoring it, but the rest of the family notices and asks him if everything's okay. Now, eventually, Tim listens to those voicemails from the missed calls, and it's his office telling him that the FBI has a warrant and they're currently in his office. Now, it seems like Lachlan has some type of obsession or interest in tsunamis, as he shows his dad one where this guy is on the beach and basically does the same thing that Victoria did in her dreams, which is letting the tsunami consume him. I think the symbolism so far is a bit heavy-handed, but we see Saxon is getting calls now, but he hasn't gotten the full picture quite yet. Now, in comes a character I hope we get more time in spending with her, and that's Pam, as she arrives with Saxton's blenders for his shakes, and it causing him to be distracted for a minute as his phone is blowing up as well. Now, Tim has to come up with a way to keep avoiding the problem back home, so he decides to accept the no digital devices policy and gives their phones and electronics to Pam.
It's a rare thing that we're together like this. So let's make the most of it. Let's make this week special, right?
Now, obviously, he's doing this because the office is blowing him up and he's avoiding his problems. But I also think that he might have meant what he said about this being a special week, because I think deep down he knows this is probably going to be the last vacation he gets to experience with his family before going back home to face what's going on. Or, as we'll talk about a little bit later, I think Tim might actually take his own life. Now, Saxon's clearly pissed and complains that Piper always gets what she wants, as we see the father pulling him aside and puts a more positive spin on giving up their electronics and suggests that it will allow them to be more present and be more in the moment and giving them some space to develop. As we see the watches, the computers, and all the phones go with Pam. Now cut to my guy Garak as Sitala asks him how he's doing after the robbery. She calls him brave, which leads to him offering his services to be an additional service as a bodyguard for her trip. Now back with Rick, he seizes the opportunity to finally approaching Sitala. Now for the first time this season, we see Rick like never before as he's acting chipper and cheerful and playful as he praises her performance from the night before. Now, he tells her this story that he's a producer and working with a high-profile project, and he would love for her to take a meeting with this very fun director. Now, obviously, we know that he knows that she's going to Bangkok and says that that's where the director is, and he gets her personal contact. Now, Rick returns to Chelsea, and he's back to his normal ways with being secretive, as Chelsea says that that's him just being a Scorpio and all. Now, we see Amrita encourages Rick to join her again for another session with her, as he reluctantly agrees. Now, he tells Chelsea about his sudden trip, which upsets her because she's going to be alone, and he tells her that maybe she'll meet another guy who's richer than him that she can sponge off of. Now, back with our ladies, Valentine tells them their health plan for the day, which includes yoga and a session with a energy healer. Now, within this conversation, we find out that Valentine has been at the White Lotus for 3 years now, and this is where Jacqueline kind of sneakily interrogates him by asking him if he came with any family, or more importantly, if he came with a girlfriend, which he said he didn't, which is the perfect opportunity for Lori to have a fling with him, as Jacqueline sets up Lori with the healing session for a little bit later. Now, after relinquishing their electronics, we see the brothers at the pool where Saxon promises to help Lachlan get laid by the end of the week. Meanwhile, we continue to get the setup of Saxon making sure that he's seen or at least noticed by Chelsea and Chloe. Now, speaking of being seen, we see Garak sees Mook and tells her about the interaction with Sitala. Now, she's proud of him, he's happy to share this with her, and look, I know this relationship will probably not end well based on the show's history with relationships at work, but man, I am rooting for them because their scenes have been so innocent, been so pure and tender, and I want my guy Godok to get the girl, but again, I just don't think it's gonna be a happily ever after ending for these two. Now, as we see this other session with Rick, he peels the onion back just a little bit and tells Amrita that he's done some bad things and made some terrible mistakes in his past. He talks about hearing how his father was said to be a good man, but again, he never got to experience that because he was murdered and he can't get his life back, but he does go on to say the following.
Maybe I can still get some satisfaction.
Now, I shared my theories last week about Rick's plan with the Hollingers having some involvement of his father's murder, and it's starting to look more and more like that's the way that the story is headed. Now, back with Piper, we see her visiting the monastery again, and she sets up an appointment for later in the week, and we see her basically envisioning what life could be like when she potentially revisits the program next summer. Now, during all this, we see Lori getting her energy session with Valentine. We also spend some time with Lachlan with his posture session. Now, here he's told that based on his posture that he's a people pleaser, as he says that he's from a family with a lot of big personalities. Now, the teacher says that he's defensive when he sits down, and it's because he's protecting himself from his more feminine side. Again, if you see my previous breakdowns, this opens up my thoughts about him exploring his sexuality and maybe being afraid of expressing himself in fear of being judged or shamed by some of his family members, particularly his brother, his dad, and his mom. Now, at this point in this episode, we're like 30 minutes in, and it's at the end of the first half of the episode, and while I'm patient, I like storytelling. I like these characters experiencing little moments of reflection and whatnot and setting up Rick and Timothy, but honestly, a whole lot of nothing was going on this first half, and it felt very uneventful, but things kind of change up in the second half of the episode. Now, we get this conversation that debunks my theory about Chloe being involved with Tanya's death, as she's talking to Chelsea about Gary being secretive, which, by the way, shout out to those who pointed this out in the comments last week, and that's how Chloe calls Greg Gary. She tells Chelsea that he's got an ex-wife and he never talks about her, and all she knows is that the ex-wife was a real mental patient. Now, as the conversation goes on, we hear Chloe telling Chelsea that his ex-wife unalived herself. Now, the way she explained the story obviously wasn't true, but the conversation ends because Chelsea leaves to go in town with Rick, who's going to get some weed. I also want to point out how Chelsea and Chloe are already best friends as they're telling each other they love each other, which to me kind of speaks to how like they might have like attachment issues where they can just fall for people so easily, which explains how Chloe got involved with Greg/Gary. Now, Sexton takes this chance to introduce himself to Chloe, and you definitely get the vibe that Chloe was sending vibes that she's interested to see where this could go, and Rick's assessment of her profession could possibly be true. Now, we see the Hollinger guys mocking Guydock after hearing his offer from earlier in an episode. Now, he tells them that he isn't trying to replace them and replace their jobs, which is something they're not too afraid of because they tell him that after the robbery, he was actually about to get fired, but Sita La prevented the firing from happening. Now, I'm not sure if they're just messing with him or if it is to be true that he was almost fired, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case because technically, while I do love Guydock, he did kind of mess up on his job by letting the robbery take place. Now, back with Rick and Chelsea, we see the weed seems to relax him and loosens him up a lot. He wants to have some fun, and he tells her that he doesn't want to go to dinner with Chloe and Gary/Greg, and he sees this snake show and he goes that way to go check it out. Now, to me, this scene leads into the idea of how drugs can be a gateway to escape your mind and your problems, as we see Timothy stressing in front of Victoria, who offers him one of her pills to take, as she says that it's going to help him lay off some stress. Now, Victoria convinces her husband that this isn't an addictive drug, but as we'll talk about later, that doesn't seem to be the case with Mr. Timothy. Now, back with Rick and Chelsea, they're discussing the snakes being in cages, and to me, the subtext in this scene is Rick seeing himself as one of these snakes being called venomous and her saying that they should be locked up because they hurt people, they bite people, but in his eyes, they have the right to be free. It's almost like he sees himself in a situation, whatever his past is and his terrible things that he's done, he's now free, so he sees again himself in these snakes. Now, during the show, we see Rick seems to be in this very euphoric state of mind as he watches these deadly cobras being tamed and played with by the expert. Now, similar to the mentioning of the pong pong tree and the deadly seeds, we have this snake scene kind of setting up something that's going to happen to Chelsea here in a second. But on a complete side note, I have to talk about this. The guy commentating the event says one of my greatest fears of all time about how the cobras can get into toilets sometimes and they can bite people that are using it. Seriously, the thought of that alone just scares the hell out of me. So let's just have some fun in the comments. Comment below some of your wildest fears of things that have little to no chance of actually happening, but it still scares the hell out of you just thinking about it. If it could happen, share some of your frightening fears in the comments below. Now, either this weed is super potent, or as he says later, is laced with something else, or it could be a little bit of the therapy session. We see Rick leaves the show and he decides to open the cages, holding those venomous stakes in them as he lets them free. But now going back to a callback to just moments ago, we see the snake situation plays out as Chelsea goes to check on him and finds him holding the snake in his hand as she unfortunately gets bitten in the leg and she's rushed to the hospital as Rick hitches a ride to follow her. Now, talking about our nighttime scenes in this week's episode, we see Chelsea is okay as Rick tells Chloe his reasoning to letting the cobras go is because he thinks the weed was laced. Now, Chloe brings up the fact that this is the second time that Chelsea's faced death and maybe should hang back for tomorrow's boat trip, a trip that Rick wasn't aware of until now. I know some of you all think that Chelsea might be the person that might end up dead by the end of the season, but I think Chelsea's going to be okay. I don't think her and Rick was going to make it out of this vacation like as a couple together potentially, but I think Chelsea has enough good juju that she's going to be okay. Hopefully, because I like her a lot, but who knows. Now back with our friend group, we see them having a bit of a laugh about Lori's time with Valentine, as she even admits that it's been a while since a man has touched her in such an intimate way. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting for me in this episode. This is probably my favorite scene as we see Kate expresses her feelings towards energy healings of them either being spooky or goofy, as Jacqueline explains her enjoyment of them because other religions, such as Christianity, are targeted more towards men. Now, Kate goes on to explain how going to church and being a Christian is her jam. It moves her and it makes her feel good. Now, remember my comments last week of me mentioning how it's just going to be a matter of time before Lori and Jacqueline find something to bond over to hate on about Kate. Well, it finally is here. Now, Kate says that she goes to church every single Sunday, and based on Jacqueline and Lori's reaction, it seemed to come to a surprise for them. Now, Jacqueline shares her concerns about Kate's time at a Texas church because of them being a red state and being Trump supporters, and it must be difficult for Kate.
You didn't vote for Trump, though, did you? Are we really going to talk about Trump tonight?
And here it is, as you can just see the pure horror and disbelief on Jacqueline's face. This moment here just killed me. Now look, we're not going to get into politics, who I voted for, who you voted for, and all that different stuff, but I think we can all agree that things that can break up a marriage, or in this case, a friendship, are finances, religion, and politics. So for those at home keeping score, let's break this down. So far, Kate and Jacqueline bond over Lori's life choices in living in New York City with a daughter and being so career driven, and also she drinks more than them. Then we have Lori and Kate bonding over Jacqueline being a narcissist and her husband and her obsession with her looks. And now we have Jacqueline and Lori sharing a level of discomfort with Kate's religious experience and also her political beliefs. Again, this is my favorite part of the episode because this sets up a pretty toxic confrontation between the friends that I think is going to be really entertaining to see once we finally get to that point in the season. Now, we didn't spend a lot of time with Belinda and Punchai in this episode, but in this moment, we see her sharing her recent experience with depression from some recent events, or should I say recent deaths at work. She goes over what happens to Armand back in season 1, but she also shares her story about Tanya and tells Punchai that she thinks that she recognized the guy Tanya left with, and she thinks that it's time to go see if it is him. As we watch, Belinda goes to their table, and the look on Gary's face is hilarious because it's like he almost saw a ghost.
Craig, isn't it?
It's Gary.
Huh. Really?
Now, Greg/Gary's spot is slowly getting blown up, and Tanya's ghost isn't done with him yet. I'm really liking where this story is going so far, like justice for Tanya, finally. But I know one thing, Greg or Gary better not hurt Belinda. Now back with the Ratliff family, we see Sexton got the invite from Chloe about the whole boat trip going on the next day, and he extends the invite to the rest of his family. And I got a kind of a kick out of this moment here because we see Victoria's concerned about if they're decent people or if they're trashy. I got a kick out of this scene because it kind of separates how rich people think about other rich people. Like, for example, the Ratliff family, you would imagine they come from money, where you have Greg that stumbled upon money, and how Victoria seems to look at people like that as trash. Now, during all this, we see Timothy is knocked out in bed from those pills, and it goes to show just how effective they are. And it goes to also show to why Victoria was knocked out for most of episode 1. Now, we get this little eye stare off moment between characters of Belinda, Greg/Gary. We also have Chloe and Sexton kind of giving each other a look down. And while all this is happening, we have the new theme song playing in the background. Which, speaking of the theme song, I guess we never discussed this, but I personally really enjoy the new song. Now, while it's not as great as maybe season 1 and 2, but I still get down with it, man. Like, I really enjoy this new theme. So let me know in the comments if you like it, if you hate it, or if you initially hated it, but it's slowly starting to grow on you. Now, as we come to a close of this week's episode, we see Godok being told by what I'm assuming is his manager, telling him that they're going to have a meeting in the morning about the recent robbery. Now, based on the trailer of this season, I bet the conversation in the morning is going to be his manager teaching Godok how to use a gun. Now, we see Rick is leaving a message to some guy by the name of Frank, and he talks about setting up a meeting with him in Bangkok for some help. As Chelsea confronts him about the snake freeing experience and more talk about religion as they talk about the Bible, how snakes are deemed evil in the Bible, as Rick continues to put his emphasis on how evil or bad things should not be treated as such because it only makes them more evil. As Chelsea lovingly warns him that it won't be that easy to get rid of her. Now again, this episode had a more of a darker tone as we get this scene here with a slightly drunk Punchai saying goodnight to Belinda as she hears and senses something dark or evil in her room. Now, similar to the end of episode 1, episode 2 with Lori and Jacqueline, now we have Kate all overhearing to what the others are saying about them late at night as Kate is seeing them whispering about her. Which again is going to set up this clash between the friends that I'm really excited for. But we end the episode back with Tim as he is going in his wife's belongings and he takes another pill, and as Vic asks him, is everything okay? We see that he doesn't answer. Now remember the side effects of that pill. Right? It causes paranoia, it causes suicidal thoughts, it causes impaired to memory, judgment, and coordination, and combining the substance with alcohol can slow down breathing and potentially lead to death, which it could be a red herring, but I think Timothy's going to probably get hooked on this drug. And again, I think that him saying to his older son that this is going to be a special week, he knows this is going to be the last time he's with his family, and I don't think he's going to want to go home to face the music. I think he's going to take his own life. Welcome to my breakdown of episode 4 of season 3 of The White Lotus. The title of this week's episode, being Hide and Seek, really describes the true meaning of why some of our characters are in Thailand, because some of them are hiding from something bad and some of them are seeking a way to escape. As Rick shares his truth with Chelsea about why they're in Thailand, we see Belinda finds out who Gary really is. Meanwhile, we see our friend group seeking some fun outside the hotel that can lead to them in some unfamiliar places. We have a lot to discuss, so let's get into my breakdown of this episode. Full spoilers ahead. We open with this incredibly beautiful shot into the hotel that seriously convinced me to add Thailand to my collection of places to visit one day because, man, this just looked amazing. But we see Jacqueline leaving Harrison, her husband of 1 year, voicemail as he hasn't been responding to any of her text messages. I wonder if Harrison is MIA because him and Jacqueline got into a big fight, which led her to making this surprise girls trip. I also feel like the show that she's famous for has or will be getting canceled sometime soon, and that also led to her getting the girls together to really get her mind off of what's going on back home. Remember, the episode is all about hiding and seeking. Now we see Belinda on the phone with her son Zion, who's on his way to see his mom, most likely in the next episode. Again, we see she hears something in the back of the room and still continues to ignore it. My best guess is it's probably one of those lizards that she was afraid of a couple episodes ago, or it could be a monkey that's stuck somewhere in her room and can't find its way out, but she's too afraid to see what it is. Now this could be being used as a metaphor for Belinda being too afraid to really come at Greg and ignoring her instincts, but as we see her eventually getting the courage to really confronting him and eventually seeing what's making that noise in her room. Now we see Timothy after taking a shower is taking his wife's pills, but you notice he's graduated from taking 2 pills in total last week to now he's taking 2 at once, but you also see he's taking them in such short windows of time. We saw that he took 1 during the afternoon of last week's episode and at night, and now he's taking 2 more in the morning, so if my math is correct, he's taken a total of 4 pills within a span of 24 hours, which I would imagine isn't safe for him to do, as we see how out of whack he was throughout this episode. Now cut to Mook and Guydock as she invites him to watch her perform later in that evening as he returns the favor and invites her to a date the following night. Now they don't have much time to talk about their day because he's got a meeting with one of his supervisors and Fabian about the robbery. Now Mook is happy for him because she believes he may be getting a promotion and that he may be getting added to the security team for Shatala's trip to Bangkok. Now in this meeting, we see Fabian starts off with complimenting Guydock about his friendliness and being well liked amongst his peers and the guests, but he reminds him of the recent crime uptick on the island and his main job is protecting the people in the hotel. As P-League shows him how they're taking the security up another notch by having a gun on them, and he'll be showing him how to use it after work. So we know based on the opening scene of episode 1 of this season that a shootout's going to occur, and we can piece together that either P-League or Guydock, or based on the ending of this episode, Timothy will most likely be involved in that shootout, but the question is, which of those gentlemen will actually be involved? Now back with the Ratliffs, we see the effects of the pills that are taking its toll on Timothy as he complains about the noise from Saxton making a smoothie as he blames the jet lag, but we know those pills are definitely the reason for his drowsiness. Now Saxton forces Lachlan to drink his smoothie as we see Piper and Saxton continue their back and forth with each other as she shares her thoughts about jacked men.
No, girls aren't into super jacked guys, by the way.
You keep your phobias to yourself. And don't turn our little brother into an agender, asexual, like you.
Now in comes Victoria, who has noticed that her recently refilled lorazepams are missing and thinks that maybe one of the kids took them. As she shares that she takes the pills because it helps her with her anxiety, especially around strangers. Now the conversation pivots into her lack of anxiety when she's back home at the clubhouse with her friends, which sparks Timothy to subtly sharing his thoughts about potentially disliking his wife's friends. But we see Timothy stops himself from speaking even further, but those pills are definitely making him forgetful of his surroundings as he stretches and opens his legs, leaving his daughter and son to see in his private parts. Now here we get our shot of what a lot of you all have spoken about since episode 1 of this season, as we see the 3 wise monkeys embodying the principle of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, which the 3 Ratliff kids are representing in this show. Now, speaking of 3s, we cut to Chelsea speaking of the things happening in 3s with the robbery and the snake show, and it leads her to thinking that she's going down a path of a Final Destination movie and that death is coming her way and she's afraid of going on this boat being her 3rd strike. Now Rick's sudden trip to Bangkok comes up as Chelsea puts on the waterworks because Rick keeps her in the dark too much. Now Rick continues to show that he actually does care for her in his own way as her on-demand tears of work as he agrees to join her on Gary's boat. Now, selfishly, I really hope that we get to learn more about how they met and who approached who in the situation, but I also hope that we eventually see Rick admit to her that she's made an impact on him for the better. Now, we check in with our friend group as Jacqueline's breaking the policy with her having her phone out in a no phone zone as she's still checking to see if her husband will respond and he still hasn't. We see Kate and Lori sharing a look at one another, one that said, yeah, there's definitely trouble in paradise with this newly married couple. As Jacqueline suggests that they do something fun for the day besides their yoga session, but secretly I bet it's to take her mind off of thinking about her husband. Now in comes Valentine, who's ready for their yoga session, but Jacqueline lets him know about the change of plans to having a day of fun and she asks him for some advice, as they set their sights on a day of unknown fun. Now back with our couple, Chelsea goes to check on a worker who was also there during the robbery as we see Rick, or should I say Richard, runs into Amrita who would love to set up another session with him. He tells her he's going to be busy for the next few days, so it's most likely that he's not going to see her again for the rest of the trip. As she tells him that he's touched her heart and leaves him with this.
You are not stuck. You understand? You can let go of your story. You can escape the karmic cycle. Find peace. In this life, I have hope for you.
Yeah.
She is such a kind person, and I really think those words will definitely come to have a big influence on him moving forward, especially if he ever gets a chance to come face to face with Jim. Now it's time to have some fun on the boat as we get the tunes in the background and we get this shot of the Rattler family all gathered together and to have some fun on Gary's boat with some hopefully decent people for Victoria's sake. Now, you all will take a notice of what Lachlan is wearing on this boat trip. Now, there seems to be some flowers on there. We got some alligators on there, which, by the way, alligators aren't local to Thailand. But the opening credits show a person being attacked by some underwater creatures. So could this be foreshadowing for Lachlan at some point this season being attacked or killed by a sea creature? We see Chloe welcoming the Rattler family on the boat and hug Saxton while doing so as Gary introduces himself and Victoria immediately questions what he did before retiring as he tells her that he did some government work and some investing. Technically, he wasn't lying. He did work for the land management and he also invested time with Tanya before he killed her. As they head up to the lounge for some drinks, we see Victoria strategically hides her purse behind one of the pillows because you can never be too safe. Remember, you never know if you're around decent people. We see that Rick and Chelsea arrive, and we already know that Rick and Timothy have a history with each other, and I have a feeling that there's going to be more between them two at some point. Now, Timothy pretends to go to the bathroom, but we see he's a full-on addict at this point as he gets his wife's purse and he takes one of the pills, but he ultimately decides to take the whole bottle and put it in his pocket, and now we'll have a chance to pop these pills like candy. Now back with the ladies, we see them arrive into the festive spot outside of the hotel that was recommended to them as Jacqueline gets recognized by some fans. Now both of these ladies have recently become friends on this trip and both of them also have recently lost their husbands and they share this tragedy in common. Now speaking of common, we see Jacqueline realizes that something's off and notices that most of the people surrounding them are older people as Jacqueline says,
"What the actual fuck is this place? Is this like a bargain hotel for retirees?"
This scene was hilarious to me, but let's unpack this scene. Did Valentine do this on purpose because he sees them as older women and thought that they would enjoy being there? Or was this a part of his plans to get them to come back to him to find a place that doesn't fit into their comfort zone? I also feel that Jacqueline was projecting her inner thoughts on getting older, and being around all these older people goes back to all the work she had done to stay looking youthful and marrying someone younger, and she just hates the thought of getting older. Honestly, it could be a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, but either way, I definitely got a good laugh out of that scene. Now, catching up with Belinda and Punchai, she tells him about running into Greg and she knows that she remembers him. Now, this got me thinking about something kind of out of left field with this crazy theory here, and it's about the noises that she's hearing in her room. Now look, we know this season is all about religion and how Punchai share with her the beliefs of spirits being around them all the time. Could the noise that Belinda is avoiding be Tanya's spirit trying to speak to her from the afterlife? Now look, I know that's a wild theory to wrap your head around, but I don't think it's too crazy and think that that's what's potentially happening here because of the focus on spirits and religion and blessings and good luck and bad luck and all these things surrounding concepts beyond grounded logical reasoning. Now, back on the boat, Victoria takes notice of the guests and how they all share a lot of vibes of Gary's and Chloe's situation going on with a bunch of older men with younger women. Now, we don't spend a ton of time with Piper in this episode, but we do see her asking her younger brother for a favor, and that being his support during dinner. Now, at dinner, she's going to tell their parents that she's moving to Thailand after graduation to join the meditation center for at least a year. As we come to find out that the reason for them being in Thailand wasn't for her to interview some monk for her paper, but instead it was for her to get the reassurance she needed that this is where she wants to be, and she got that in last week's episode. Again, remembering the title of this is Hide and Seek, and she's seeking that reassurance that this is where she wants to be. Meanwhile, Saxon steals Locke away, and he wants him to join him into talking to some of the women on the boat as they make their move. Now, we get to meet some of these other guests on the boat as Rick gets an unwanted earful from a money mover, and Victoria and Tim meet a couple, and we see Victoria takes notice of Tim's odd behavior. Now, as she leaves, we get some character backstory from Timothy and this idea of him following in the footsteps of his grandfather, who was the governor of North Carolina, as well as his very successful businessman of a father. But again, we're reminded how much these pills have affected him as he shares too much information about his excitement of both of his parents being dead with some strangers that he just met. Now, lorazepam isn't known for being a truth-speaking pill, but again, like I mentioned last week, I think Timothy's at a point where he knows the storm back home is closing in on him, and he's just saying and doing whatever he wants at this point, regardless of how uncomfortable or how inappropriate it makes others feel. Now we see Victoria goes to get the pills from her purse, but she sees that they're missing. Now we see Piper trying to have a sweet moment with her father about him adapting to being in Thailand, but this moment's ruined because we know he's high as a kite as he takes this moment to being weird and starts grabbing on her face. Now look, I wouldn't argue with anyone in the comments if you all read that scene with him saying his daughter was perfect and rubbed on her face as being a inappropriate moment or maybe even a sexual moment between the two, or at least from the father to his daughter. So let me know in the comments if you all took him as that just being affected by the pills and just being weird, or if it was more about him being inappropriate and touching and saying those things to his daughter. Meanwhile, we see Victoria shares the breaking news about her pills being stolen and how uncomfortable she feels being around the strangers. Now, during all this, we see Lachlan showing off his magic skills while Greg watches just how closely Saxton and Chloe are sitting next to each other. Now, we see Chelsea pulling Rick aside because of his attitude, and she wants him to let her in more to where he's at mentally, or else she's gone to make the decision to eventually leave him sooner rather than later. She wants to know why they're here in Thailand and what's going on in Bangkok, and she wants answers now. Look, I don't like to say I was right a lot, but remember what I said a couple weeks ago. Rick tells her that he's going to Bangkok in the morning, as we know that he's going there for Shatala and her husband, but it hit me in this moment, yet again, a crazy theory, stick with me. What if Jim, her husband, had something to do with his father being murdered and he's seeking revenge?
We're here because the fucking dude who murdered my father owns this hotel.
We find out that Rick's father came to Thailand to help people in need from Jim, who was stealing their land, but long story short, it got him killed. He doesn't have all the details, but his mom told him that Jim and maybe others were involved, but Jim was the main person behind it all. Now, Rick doesn't exactly know what he's going to say or do when he sees Jim face to face, but at least he's got this off his chest, and he felt comfortable enough to tell Chelsea, who doesn't run away or judge him after learning this, but instead she gives him a hug. Now, I just got a W, but followed that up with an L, because to me this also confirms that he wasn't involved in a robbery like I theorized a couple weeks ago, but now thinking what led them to Thailand makes all the previous scenes where we saw Rick being closed off and seeing like he had this negative cloud over him, it makes so much more sense now. Now back with the ladies, they return to the hotel and they steal Valentine from work and make him physically show them a good time. As they arrive to a spot outside the main tourist area, as he's taking them to a club later with some of his friends, but in the meantime, they're going to walk around and enjoy the locals with their water guns, which he tells them not to worry about. Now, for those wondering, this is something that indeed happens in Thailand. It's called the Thailand Sungrung Festival, which is famous for its water fights, which take place throughout the country in April. The water fights symbolize washing away bad luck and ushering in a new year. So knowing that, we see the ladies running away from their blessings instead of embracing it before heading into this unknown night with strangers. Now, talk about embracing, we see Belinda listens to her intuition and she Googles Tanya and sees all the reports about the millionaire's death from season 2. Notice off to the side where we see Tanya's net worth and her background, but more importantly, it shows Greg's name as her husband of 2 years. Now, she sees the reports of how Greg is wanted for questioning in Italy as she dives deeper and finds Greg's profile online where it shows his 27 years of service to the BLM, and she knows who Gary really is now. But the question is, what will she now do with this information? Now, back with the mastermind behind Tanya's death, he allows Chloe to take the boat while he tells her that he's got some business to attend back home, which was actually the same thing he said to Tanya back in season 2, and not much longer before he killed her. So does he plan to kill Belinda to make sure he got all the loose ends taken care of? Now we see Gregory/Greg having a drink with Timothy as he asks if he enjoys living in Thailand and tells Greg,
Heard someone say that anyone who moves to Thailand is either looking for something or
hiding from something. Neither. Just got sick of the rat race. So what about you?
Little do these men know they have more in common than they think, because they both are hiding something that could be life-changing for the worse, and they're also seeking a way to escape. Now, the daytime boat fun is over, and it's now time for the after party, as Saxton tells the rest of his family that him and Lachlan will be hanging back to enjoy the fun for the full moon celebration, which will be leaving Piper alone for dinner for herself for telling her parents the news. Now, Rick tells Chelsea that even though they had their recent heart-to-heart, that he's still going to Bangkok, and he's seeking answers for the man who ruined his life since day one. As he leaves Chelsea behind to seek answers and confront the man his mother told him killed his father on her deathbed. Now, the ladies are looking to turn their day around as they meet Valentine's friends, Alexei and Vlad. Now, I'm going to play detective here for a second. Now, we didn't get to see the actual robber's face, but we did see the back of a taller gentleman's head. Could the big fella Vlad be the guy that we saw here? Again, connecting Valentine to the robbery as well. Now, at dinner, we see Victoria making fun of her boat experience being full of con man and tax cheaters. She even makes a comment about how it wouldn't surprise her if some of those men were actually killers. Now, we all know she wasn't too far off, because we know Greg is to be that, or at least had his hand in Tyan's death, but I did find it funny that she said that, yet she was okay with leaving both her sons on this boat of killers. Now, Victoria tells Piper how lucky she is to have a Boy Scout of a father as he leaves the table to get his phone from Pam. He sees all the unanswered messages on his phone, and he sees there's no escaping from what's back home waiting for him. Here we see Belinda and Greg/Gary share another stare-off, but this time around she doesn't look away, but she looks him straight in the eye and basically says, "I got my eye on you now." We see Godot gets the gun for target practice ready as Mook shows him her outfit for her performance coming up. Now, Mook looks amazing, by the way, but we see her getting walked out by Godot, and he leaves the gun unattended. Now, I don't want this to be true, but I know some of you all think that she might have had something to do with the robbery. Now, her distracting him in this moment I think is a coincidence, but him leaving the gun unattended could point to the idea that he's so caught up in her presence that she's secretly hiding her true identity, and him not knowing her involvement in a robbery could be an interesting twist. Now, back with Timothy, he finds out that Kenny cut a deal with the feds, and his lawyer suggests that he pled guilty and cut a deal as well. It's on the table that maybe Timothy will have to go serve a few months in federal prison, but he tells Chuck that he'll rather die than spend a second in prison. Did Timothy just submit himself as our #1 candidate to die at the end of this season? Now, after he hangs up on Chuck, he begins having a mini panic attack, and he sees the gun on Godot's office that he left out. Now, as Godot heads back to his post and walks past Timothy, he notices that the gun is missing, and he has his own little mini panic attack. But my question is now, what exactly will Timothy do with this gun? As we end this episode with seeing Rick boarding his flight to Bangkok, as Timothy returns back to the table and pretends that he's not scared out of his mind and running off of lorazepam all of his system, as he also has a gun in his pocket. By the way, they made it a point to show us that there are cameras always on, so I would imagine Godot will see the footage and know that Timothy was actually the one that took the gun. We see Greg back at his place on the top of the hill as he goes to Belinda's Instagram and sees her with Zion, and he sets his plans for her and her son. Now, does his plans include kidnapping Belinda or taking Zion as a ransom and as a threat to not tell anyone about his past, or will he attempt to put a hit on her to make sure that she won't tell anyone about his secret? As we end with our last shot back on the boat, we see Chelsea, Chloe, Saxton, Lachlan, and others having drinks, about to have some fun into the night. Welcome to my breakdown of episode 5 of season 3 of The White Lotus. This week's episode title was Full Moon Party, and putting an emphasis on the word party as we watch some of our characters having a spicy good time while others are thinking about ending theirs or others' lives. As the ladies have a night out with Valentine and his boys, we see the Ratliff brothers find themselves getting even closer, and Rick hears a very interesting and freaky ass story about his friend's path to finding Buddhism. We have a lot to discuss in this very hot and scandalous episode, so let's get it in, which is what some of these characters did in this episode. Spoilers ahead. We open this episode where we left off as we get this shot of the full moon and the start of a very wild night. As we cut to Gadak, who's rummaging through his booth looking for the missing gun, and as I suspected last week, Gadak looked at the surveillance footage and sees Timothy entering his post and taking the gun. Look, I think Gadak is the nicest and most trustworthy and innocent person on the show, but my goodness, he has to be the worst security guard of all time. We'll discuss his lack of making a decision later, but man, seriously, he's the worst at his job. Now, speaking of innocent, we cut to the Ratliff family where despite her brother not backing her up, we see Piper musters up enough courage to telling her parents her plans for next year to understanding Buddhism. Now, Timothy is still in his own little world while Piper describes her plans, and we see Victoria shares her doubts in her daughter's belief in Buddhism, especially with her daughter not being from China.
You can be interested in this stuff, but you could never really be it. We're from an entirely different world.
Okay, well, you call yourself a Christian, but you weren't born in Bethlehem.
Well, everyone I know is a Christian. My parents were Christians. Your parents are Christians.
Now, I found this to be an interesting conversation where Victoria talks about the idea of being born into a religious belief and then being Christian and how she feels Piper should just follow suit to what her parents and their parents' beliefs were. Now, not to get too religious, but if you all feel comfortable enough to share this in the comments below, but as you are now an adult, have you found yourself sharing the same religious beliefs that your parents had while you were growing up, or have you found other beliefs to believe in as you become an adult? But now back to the actual scene. Unfortunately, Piper's parents are just too numbed out to have this type of nuanced conversation, as Timothy offers some insight as he questions Piper about being here for a paper, which he reveals to them that it was actually all a lie.
The next year.
You want to live in Taiwan?
True story, when Victoria said that to her daughter, I was taking a sip of water during that scene, and I swear to you all, I damn near choked on the water because it was just so damn funny to me. Meanwhile, we see Fabian okays Gadak to watch Mook's performance briefly while the booth is unattended, but we see Gadak's killing two birds with one stone as he's also here to observe the person who stole the gun and Timothy as well. Now back on Gary's boat, Saxton gives Locke more of his Andrew Tate advice on getting ladies by telling him that people like being used and they lack vision and sit around waiting to be told what to do. Now this is cut between Chloe telling Chelsea how she's taken a liking to Lachlan because she's a fan of innocent young guys and describes how they act by shaking when she's naked in front of them. Now to me, Chloe and Saxon seems to be two peas in a pod. I just find it funny to see the parallels between the brothers and Chloe and Chelsea. It's like Saxton and Chloe are essentially bad influences on Locke and Chelsea, who to me are the complete opposite of the brother and this newfound friend, and it's just people giving them advice, and while their plots aren't rooted in religion, there's definitely a theme of lust and curiosity and falling victim to being pressured to becoming something that you aren't. Now Saxon lays out the game plan where Locke will make his move on Chloe, meanwhile he's going to pay his attention on Chelsea because it turns him on that she's been rude to him so far and hasn't given him any attention. As we watch both alpha leaders veer their little pupils off course into the night of bad decision making as they get closer to the moon. Now from one party group to the next, we check in with our ladies who are getting to know their friends for the night as Valentine claims him and his friends have known each other since they were young, similar to the ladies. Now I could be wrong and Valentine's a good guy just trying to have fun with these visitors here in Thailand, but I'm still in the camp that they have some involvement in being the robbers. But putting that aside for a second, I found it very interesting that he told the ladies last episode that he came to Thailand alone, no family, no friends, but yet he has his friends here. Next, we find out that Alexei and Valentine attended ballet school together, just like Jacqueline and Lori, which to me doesn't sound like a coincidence. To me, it sounds like someone just did their homework on who their targets are. Could it be that Valentine and his boys are planning something bad with the famous actress and her friends, and they are just too gullible right now to notice it? Or are they just having a good time and shouldn't have to worry about Valentine and his boys? Now, question for you all in the comments. If you were in a lady's shoes right now, how would you handle this situation? Would you go out, have a good time, go with the flow of the night, or would you have your radars up? Let me know in the comments below. Now on the dance floor, Jacqueline spots some younger women looking at them and judging them, or at least that's what appears to be happening in Jacqueline's eyes as she's being judged by younger younger women who may think she's too old to be out this late and hanging with these younger guys. So with that, we see Jacqueline takes things up a notch and she starts getting more seductive with her dance moves, and something you wouldn't think a married woman would do.
You know, it's a lot of weird activities going on, and I don't like that. I don't like that.
Now back at the hotel, we see snippets of Mook's performance as she makes sure that Gaidak is watching her, as we see Piper tells her mom that she's not built like her older brother, and she is going to be using her privileged position and handed opportunities in life. Now Victoria thinks that Piper is being way too extreme, and she's going to lose the values that she was raised on, and she looks at her husband to step in, but all Timothy has to say is that he's got to go to the bathroom, and he leaves the table again as we see Gaidak follows him. Now, surprisingly enough, we see Gaidak actually confronts Tim about the situation, but he's being very timid. He isn't being direct. He isn't pressing him hard enough about what he actually is talking about, because we see Timothy tells him he has no idea what he's talking about as he just leaves him there. Now, backtracking a bit and talking about the conversation between Victoria and Piper. To me, this idea of Victoria using the values or the beliefs they raise their kids on, to me just seems like it's made up. It just feels like it's a false pretense to make Piper feel guilty about taking her life in her own hands and taking it in a different direction than her parents. Now, during all this, we see Fabian tells Belinda that she's got a fan asking about her and he's going to introduce her to them soon. Now, it was never revealed in this episode who Fabian was referring to, but based on him talking to Greg in last week's episode, it's a pretty safe bet that he was indeed talking about Greg. Now, Belinda confronts Fabian about this and she tells him about the tie-in situation and her suspicions about Gary/Greg's involvement and that he probably killed his ex-wife. Now, I do wonder if Greg and Fabian have some type of agreement between them where Greg pays him hush money to make sure nobody questions where he comes from. Reason I say that is because we just saw Fabian last week talking to Gaidak about the high crime rate on the island, and he's also mentioning to Belinda that he's very aware that some of their guests have very colorful past, and now he's being hesitant to not even at least entertain Belinda's concerns with a potential killer on the island. Look, nothing might not actually come up between Fabian and Greg having like a past of their own, but I definitely think not listening to Belinda will definitely catch up to him. Now, our ladies are now relaxed and chill and taking Shia LaBeouf shots and getting very comfortable with the guys. Now at this point, Jacqueline is being a really solid wing woman for Lori to Valentine and really pushing for them to hook up, but we'll discuss more on that a little bit later. Now, Kate's the only one who hasn't completely let her guard down, and she sets her limit and she doesn't take any of the shots, which in my opinion is a very smart move. Reason I say that is I think you should always have that one friend in the friend group that accepts the responsibility of being the babysitter for the night, and we see her doing that to a really good extent. Now, meanwhile, Alexei gets into a fight with who I'm assuming is maybe his girlfriend, as Kate suggested they end their night, but Jacqueline and Lori have other plans in their minds as they invite the guys over to their villa. Now, you'll notice the woman arguing with Alexei calls him Nosha. Now, that could be his real name, this could be his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend or someone that he's been hooking up with on the island, or was that the name that he made up? Maybe this is just another woman that he and Valentine have played in the past and she's calling him out on his BS. Now back at the hotel, we see Gaidak is keeping the gun situation to himself, and now back in the room, we see Victoria continues to question Piper's plans. Now Victoria does not care if Piper's monk has written any books in the past, as she shares her thoughts about how she feels other people who have written books in the past have turned out to be crazy people, as she uses the extremes from Charles Manson to the Clintons, as she even takes shots at the Catholics.
They're sex cults, Piper. Nexium. Oh, come on. You could end up a concubine to some weird guru with a bunch of sister wives, getting branded and all sorts of... Don't look at me like I'm crazy. It happens all the time. Shelter girls like you are constantly getting brainwashed and turned out.
Now they're going to take a family trip to the monastery in the morning, as Victoria is going to drink herself to sleep. Now this whole situation has Timothy reminiscing about his past when he used to be an altar boy when he's a kid, as he begins singing in the bleak midwinter. Again, we see him going down this memory lane and him remembering the times when things were more simple and before he got caught up in this case and facing prison time. Now I want to share a theory with you all. Now we know how religion's being used so far in this show, especially in this episode, and someone like Frank, who we'll discuss soon, he used Buddhism as a way to escape his old ways. ways. Now we see that Piper has sought out Buddhism. Could it be that she did something in her past that led her to finding this religion? Could Piper have had something to do with her father and the Kenneth situation? Did she give over information to the feds and she now feels guilty for having her father go into prison? Now back with our other party crew, we see Locke is getting way too messy for his brother's standards as he's drinking way too much. Now in this scene, we see Locke telling his older brother that one day he's going to take him down, and after their kiss later in the episode, I wonder if that had a double meaning. Now we see Lachlan taking a drug that Chloe got from a woman that she seems to know as Chelsea tries to call Rick to check in with him, but he doesn't answer the phone, and we will be getting to Rick very soon, but him not answering leads Chelsea to just kind of giving up on him for the night, and she's going to have fun as we see her taking a drug that Chloe got, and we even see the drug-free Saxon gets pressured into taking it as well. Now back with Belinda, we see her showing Punchai all the evidence she has on Greg, and he promises to keep her safe. Now as I suspected, the noise in Belinda's room was indeed a lizard, but it wasn't the ghost theory that I talked about with Tanya last week, as Punchai saves the day. Now Belinda wants him to stay overnight for her protection from the lizards and Greg, and we see he agrees. Now Belinda tries to play it cool with Punchai in her room with him in his robe, and she has her robe on, and listen, my boy Punchai knew what the vibes were for the night as things between them heat up, and it looks like they're going to be sleeping in the same bed for the rest of the night, and I do wonder if this new relationship will complicate their work relationship moving forward. Now the full moon is in full effect as we see the night is getting more intense, and there's definitely sex in the air as the ladies are back at their villa with the guys as we see Vlad jumps in the pool naked. Meanwhile, Kate's in her pajamas watching from the beach chair. Now Lori decides to take her top off, and we see under the water that other people have taken their clothes off as well. Now this is cut between seeing our other party group of the episode where we see whatever drug they took is hitting both of the brothers pretty hard, and this jumps cut to Piper, who seems to be seeing what they're doing in the moment as she's in her meditative state of mind. Now after many drinks of the night, we see Lori is talking to the guys about her struggles at work and having to support her ex-husband. All while that conversation's happening, we see Jacqueline is about to pass out. We see Kate is had about enough of Vlad's sad stories about death as she calls it a night. Now to my surprise, they actually head out as Lori's whispering very closely into Valentine's ears as they leave for the night, and they get invited to the boxing match happening in the next episode. Jacqueline and Lori had an absolute blast as we see her mention to Lori that she should have slept with one of the guys, but she didn't, as they head to bed, or at least two of them are headed to bed, which leads us to seeing Lori knocked down on her bed as we cut to Jacqueline getting a text, and it's from Valentine. Remember, all night long, Jacqueline was Lori's hype girl. She was encouraging her all night to make her moves, to hit on Valentine, to sleep with Valentine. Well, I guess Jacqueline said to herself, I ain't gonna let this good milk go to waste, as we see Valentine is ass out and they have sex. With that said, I guess her and Harrison have a open relationship, or again, we don't know if they had some big fight which led to them having this trip that we see them on together. Either way, I don't see this being kept secret for much long from Lori.
I look for a woman that's not promiscuous.
What are some of your deal breakers?
Deal breaker, being promiscuous.
Now to the best scene for me as we catch up with Rick in this episode as he's arrived in Bangkok. We see Rick meets up with his friend Frank, who we remember he called a few episodes back. As the season's big celebrity cameos continue, with us having past Survivor cast members and voice performances from Kiki Kwan as Kenneth to Scott Galloway as the lawyer on the phone with Timothy. And now we have one of my favorite actors appearing in Sam Rockwell, who's playing Frank. Now sober for 10 months, we learn that Frank and Rick used to have some wild days back in the day, but that was long ago, as this is the first time that both of them have hung out without being drunk. Now the reason Frank isn't drinking anymore is because he's found religion, but that doesn't stop him from giving Rick what he wanted. That's revealed later in the episode in the bag, and most likely has something to do with him confronting Jim. Now this is where things get really interesting as Frank shares his story about what led him to Thailand, which sounds like he was on a run from his past in America. But he goes into his obsession with Asian women and how he went down this path of sex and partying every night, and he started to lose his mind. The reason this is my favorite scene is because you have two incredible actors in Walton Goggins and Sam Rockwell, but more importantly, the story Frank shares and the way Sam delivers it It felt so damn believable and extremely wild. As he talks about, after thousands of nights of drinking and having sex with so many people, Frank came to the conclusion that maybe he wanted to be what he obsessed about, which is becoming an Asian woman himself. He recalls a time where he freed himself by allowing himself to getting, let's just say, handled while engaging in sexual activities with a trans woman, and it was basically liberating for him and really opened his eyes and other parts of himself as well. He wanted to go even further down this road and made himself into what he desired and met up with some men who looked similar to him, and he got addicted to it and even paid some of the money as well. Couple things I want to point out about this moment here. Remember Greg's past with Quentin that was revealed in season 2? I wonder if Greg and Frank have ever crossed paths. But going to Walton Goggins, Rick's character's reaction during this scene, the look on his face is exactly how I looked the more and further he went down with this story. Like, he's got to be thinking, we used to have wild nights, but never to this extent, as Frank continues on his journey of self-discovery.
Could I be an Asian girl?
Right. I don't know.
And then I realized I gotta stop the drugs, the girls, trying to be a girl.
As this is what led him to becoming a Buddhist. To me, this was the highlight of this episode. This conversation did not go where I expected. I thought he was going to go into this detail of some job that he did in the past, which led him to Thailand and how it changed him as a person. But nope, this story was way more interesting. As they say their goodbyes for the night, we see Rick wants a favor from Frank, and it's a little game of role-playing for tomorrow night. As we see, there was a gun in the bag that Frank gave Rick as he plans to use violence to get what he wants out of Jim. We see Rick finally calls Chelsea back, but she is busy. Now we see our other party crew keeps the fun going for the night, and the drinks are still flowing as we watch as both of the ladies share a kiss, Chloe and Lachlan share a kiss. But then we have the two brothers sharing a kiss, and if you notice, Lachlan is definitely into kissing his older brother right now. I can't say the same for Sexton. Like, he doesn't seem to be comfortable in the situation, which goes back to the first episode and that awkward moment at the end of episode 1, where Lachlan was looking at him pleasure himself, but also he was staring at his ass the very next morning. I've always thought Saxon's overly hyper masculinity was a sign of him maybe being closeted, but go back to my first breakdowns where I mentioned if Lachlan was maybe interested in his older brother and he was going to go on this journey of his own self-discovery and sexuality, and it definitely seems to be the case after this scene. Now, we end this episode with Timothy after talking to his wife about how sometimes things can just come into life and just upend everything, which led him to going into the next room to begin writing a note as he writes, "I'm sorry and I love you all," as he puts a gun to his head. Now, luckily for him, Victoria doesn't have her pills anymore, or else she would have been knocked out. But instead, she comes in the room to check on him, which causes him not to go through with ending his own life. As Timothy finally vents and tells his wife,
"To understand the expectations, give me an idea, the expectations on me, day one. I haven't known a single day without all this shit put on me."
Again, this brief interaction seemed to stop him from unaliving himself as he prays for guidance. This whole idea, or the backbone of this episode for some of these characters who are seeking or have sought out religion as a way to express themselves and release themselves from their past experience, I wonder if we're going to see Timothy in next week's episode maybe go to the monastery and actually learn from his daughter. Welcome to my breakdown of episode 6 of season 3 of The White Lotus. This week's title was Denials, which is a perfect way to describe what we see in this week's story. With the definition of denial being the action of declaring something to be untrue, we see a lot of our characters wearing denial to a T. As we see the aftermath of the full moon celebration affecting their brothers in a very major way, meanwhile we see their father Timothy has some very dark thoughts. We also see everyone else just trying to figure out who they are or who they want to be. We have a lot to discuss in this very dark and incest-heavy episode, so let's break it all down, spoilers ahead. Now, it's almost the next morning after last week's celebration, but one person who isn't celebrating is Timothy, who's imagining what would have happened if he took his own life and leaving his family to finding him laying in his own blood and horror. I'm not gonna lie, for a second there, I actually thought that he did it, like they almost got me in this opening, but we see Timothy takes the gun and hides it in the drawer in the living room and takes another pill before heading off to bed. Now in bed, bed, Victoria still is under the belief that Timothy is under all this stress because of Piper's recent news, as she tells him that Piper will eventually find her happiness just like them and she'll be normal again.
I'm not worried in the slightest.
Now, as we catch up to the rest of the characters, we see Guy Tok on his bike to work, where his manager or supervisor wants him to take the gun out after their shift for shooting practice. Now, we also see Valentine and Jacqueline saying their goodbyes after their sleepover, as Kate, who's on the phone, takes notice of him leaving and whoever she's talking to most definitely getting all the tea of what she just witnessed, most likely her husband. Which, if it is her husband or not, I wonder if she did tell them what she saw, and will that person start a rumor online about Jacqueline, which could potentially ruin her marriage. Now, back on the boat, we find the brothers shared a bed, and we get the reverse of episode 2, where this time around, a very confused Saxon wakes up to the sight of his little brother's ass this time around. Now, at the start, we don't really know if we can really trust a flashback where we see Saxon remembering what happened before falling asleep, but later on, it's confirmed by Chloe. Now, in him trying to remember what happened the night before, we see him trying to convince Chelsea to sleep with him, but she doesn't. Now, as we see him making out with Chloe, we see that she's more interested in Locke as they actually hook up, but that's not all. We see Locke also make sure that he's taking care of his brother at the same time. Yes, that's right. We see while Locke was smashing Chloe, he's also pleasuring his older brother. Look, from the start, I had this feeling. I know some of you all didn't share the same sentiments, but I think it's kind of clear as day now that Locke was indeed checking out his brother in episode 1. He was the one that enjoyed their kiss that they shared in last week's episode, and he doesn't seem to be a victim of his brother like some of you all initially thought after episode 1. Now, another thing I saw that many of you all pointed out in the comments last week was that it appeared that Lachlan didn't actually take the drug and he was pretending to be high, but in reality, while he may have been drunk, he seemed to have had plans of taking advantage of his brother under the influence. Look, let's talk about it. HBO is no stranger to having incest relationships in some of their biggest shows, but no matter the context or the genre, I'm team no incest. I wouldn't say this is taking me out of the story. It's just not a lifestyle choice of incest that I necessarily support, but put that aside, last week's episode and this week's episode really reshapes Lachlan as this character that I kind of had empathy for at the beginning of the season, but now I'm questioning whether if he didn't take the drug or not, but he knew his brother took it, and again, I think he took advantage of him. I am really unsure where this particular plot is going, but let me know throughout the episode, how did you all feel about Lachlan? Now, the Ratliff boys and Chloe and Jacqueline weren't the only ones who got laid in last week's episode, as we cut to Belinda and Pungchai waking up under her, and I would imagine they had a good time. As we see her smiling, but she hears the front gate open and she sees her son Zion is here. This moment of Zion seeing his mom with this man in bed and him not freaking out or causing a scene or doing anything crazy, it told me everything I need to know about this mother and son relationship. So many times in movies and shows, we've seen it where the kids freak out on their parents and their parents have to spend so much time apologizing. And look, walking in on your parents and seeing them post-sex isn't something I think anyone wants to see. But in this scenario, Zion handled it like an adult, as did Belinda. And again, it just let me know that this will be a relationship that I will enjoy. Now, back on the boat, we see Chloe on the phone with Gary Gregg, who's throwing a tantrum over the fact that she took his boat without him. Now, Chloe can read between the lines. She knows that Gary Gregg knows that she slept with one of the brothers, but she tells Chelsea that she actually hooked up with both of them. Chloe thinks that Gary will dump her, as Chelsea tries to cheer her up by letting her know that there's plenty of fish in the sea, but Chloe isn't stupid. She realizes that she has a good situation going on with Gary and she doesn't want to start over from scratch. From here, we briefly see Chelsea finally hearing back from Rick, and of course she's checking up on him. Now, she's still very fearful, and she's still in the mindset that bad luck comes in threes, and she's afraid that it's just a matter of time before that third bad thing is coming, and honestly, by the way things are shaping up, she's not wrong. Now, we see Saxon is still in disbelief about the night and tries sobering up, and in doing so, his memory is more vivid, and we get a more accurate moment of us seeing it being Lachlan's hand under the sheets, and it was not Chloe's based on the first angle of the shot that we started this episode with. Now, Locke claims that he can't remember what happened the night before, and Saxon says that they both blacked out. But we actually cut back to that act, and we see both of them looking at each other while Locke was pleasuring his older brother. Now, after seeing them looking at each other, I know that drinks and drugs were involved on both parties, but I could see how people may say that maybe Saxon subconsciously knew what was happening, and again, the episode's title can point to that. But then on the other side of me, I can 100% be behind him not having a clue of what actually was truly happening during that moment, and maybe he thought that it was Chloe's hand instead. Again, if Locke did spit out that drug last week and he was very much sober, well, not entirely sober because we know he did have quite a few drinks, but he wasn't maybe affected by the drug like the others were, but he seems to be worried about Saxon's reaction, almost like he was hoping for him to act differently, as we see Saxon ignoring him on the boat and almost avoiding him as he runs to the bathroom throwing up just thinking about what happened. Now we cut to our ladies, minus Jacqueline this time, which leaves Kate to telling Lori about their sleepover. Now we see that Lori is visibly upset after learning this, and also gives this look like this isn't the first time that Jacqueline has done this, which is actually said later on in this episode.
Do you see how she was pushing him on me? And all the time she wanted him, she has not changed at all.
Now, a question of the week for you all, to all my adults out there. If you were in this situation, whether you want to label it as guy code or woman code, putting Jacqueline's marriage aside for the situation, but was Jacqueline wrong for sleeping with Valentine, or are the rules different when you're on vacation because once they leave, they'll never see him again? Also, Jacqueline gave Lori the opportunity to sleep with him, even though we don't know if the feeling was mutual. Like, we don't know if Valentine actually is attracted to Lori. So comment below if you think Jacqueline was right to shoot her shot, taking her being married away out of this equation, or was she wrong for what she did and she broke the woman code? Now, speaking of Jacqueline, her husband finally calls her back as he says he was busy at work on the set all day, as we get a little insight on this relationship that seems to be more from a place of lust more so than love, as he seems to only care about being so horny and missing her, and she plays along. Meanwhile, we see Lori dogging her out, saying how Jacqueline is now this aging actress and just throws herself around to get the attention of man, and she's just passively going in on her as a person or so-called friend. Now, Kate says that she didn't think that Lori would care so much, and honestly, I'm kind of torn. Like, on one side of me, I believe her because they are adults and this was a one-night stand, but I also want to call BS because I feel Kate's been the one common denominator within the drama of both sides of the gossiping.
I just thought you were going to laugh about it.
Oh, yeah, I'm laughing. It's funny. Ha! But also,
yeah.
But to make matters more interesting, and one of my favorite scenes of this week's episode, speaking of the devil, Valentine comes to say good morning to the both of them. Now, this is what I'm here for. In my personal life, I do everything in my power to avoid messy situations, but this is why I watch this show. I really enjoyed this scene. Like, I love this scene because Carrie Coon is really playing it well. Like, you can tell she's salty as hell right now as we see Lori giving him the cold shoulder and her skipping out on their sessions for the day and not going to watch the fight later in the evening. And then she even throws in a subtle jab about Jacqueline not being with them because she had a late night. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a slow build up that I know a lot of you all complain about, but the tea is finally boiling.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
Now we catch up with mother and son, and again, if I couldn't love them even more, we see Zion is happy that his mom still got her groove back and is still sexually active.
Got a new boyfriend now?
Hey, mama gotta have a life too.
Now look, I respect that Belinda is a cool mom and a chill mom, but she still has her boundaries with her son as he talks about his sex life being dry right now, as we see Belinda putting him on game.
You might be an adult, but I'm still your mother. I don't want to hear that shit. First you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the woman. Right?
Now Fabian comes in and says his hellos, and he actually invites them to his singing debut that's going to take place later that evening, but you can tell that Belinda is still bothered by the whole Gary Gregg situation, or at least how Fabian handled it, as you can just tell that she's uncomfortable around him, and rightfully so. Now the Ratliff boys return to the villa and learn about Piper's future plans from their mother, even though that we know that Lachlan already knows. Now Locke repays his promise that he made to Piper a couple episodes ago by backing her up in the situation, as he says that he thinks is a pretty cool opportunity for her to come back to Thailand, but their mother still isn't convinced. as they head out to meet what Victoria hopes better be the best Buddhist in China. Now Locke agrees to go with them in support of Piper to meeting the monk, but again, he doesn't get a response from his older brother when he says goodbye. Yet another example of how this family, and honestly any of these characters, really can't seem to understand that communication is key, but instead they avoid the tough problems by ignoring it and being in denial. Now this is an interesting moment. We get to actually see Gary and Chloe alone in his house, and he knows that she's lying about not sleeping with one of the brothers, but he just doesn't know exactly which one it was. As we see that she continues to lie about it, but he's throwing a get together and he wants her to invite the brothers and needs her help with something. Now, it was never confirmed what he wanted from her in this episode, but I was left thinking that it either had to do with something with the brothers or Belinda. And chances are that she's going to probably agree to help him because she doesn't want to lose her golden ticket to this lifestyle with Gary/Greg. Now, we see Punchai continues to be a stand-up guy and offers his support in Belinda's dreams and helping her open her own shop one day, but he wants to do it together. I have some thoughts. First off, super nice of him to offer that, but I mean, come on, bro. It's been no more than a week that they first met each other in person, and they just slept with each other the day before, and he's already talking about going into business together. Am I tripping in this situation? I guess Belinda really put it on him that good. Let me know in the comments, is this a red flag of him moving way too fast, or is it just a very nice person doing a very nice thing? And secondly, we know what happened last time someone offered to help her in business. They end up being Tanya, and she got distracted and she ended up dead. So did Punchai just set a similar fate for himself, or will the spy she wanted be her happy ending? Now back in Bangkok, we have the meeting with Rick and Shatala as Rick takes notice of her security situation in preparation for her to meet with his director. Now Rick keeps appearances going with his chipper attitude and continues this lie about the movie, and he tells her that the part requires the director and him to come over to her house to observe her being in her habitat, obviously as a way to get into Jim, which we see later on. Now at the monastery, Piper meets with the monk. Now Piper has a brief conversation alone with him before her parents arrive, and we see her getting a little emotional and shares with him how she's felt lately and how she doesn't share any interests or have similar values that her family does. Now if I'm being honest, I'm still not super invested in her personal story this season, but I can still appreciate the sentiment behind her being someone who's grown in her own values as an adult and she doesn't support her family ways of life and their thinking. Now Piper does her best to prep the monk before her parents walk in, especially her mom, but we see that he's super chill and he's super nice about the whole situation, and he tells her that he would love to answer any questions that they may have. Now back outside, Victoria takes it upon herself to walk around while Timothy speaks with the monk. Now this was another standout moment for me as we watched the monk explain to Timothy why someone like Piper or others travel around the world to join the monks.
Many young people come here from your country. I think because maybe spiritual malaise, lost connection with nature, a family, lost connection with the spirit.
When the monk said to Timothy, "You cannot outrun pain," it definitely hit me in the feels because I've done this in the past. I'll be honest with you all. I've tried running away from my problems sometimes, and I definitely related to this scene, and we can see that it definitely hit Timothy with his current situation as well. Now, Timothy has one more important question for him, and it's one of those big ones that I think we all think about sometimes, and it's the question about what happens to you when you die.
You land back into the water, become one with the ocean again.
Now, me personally, I wouldn't say I'm super religious at this point in my life, but I have my own personal beliefs. But I grew up in the church. I was a part of all the different church activities and whatnot. But I really like the monk's response and the viewpoint about being one with the ocean and one consciousness, and death being sort of like a homecoming. But again, it really hits Timothy, and it seemed like it took his mind off of his current situation. Now, again, on another personal note, death is something I've always had a really interesting relationship with, but as I've gotten older, I tend to find myself feeling similar to what the monk just told him, and I see death as more of a reality more than being afraid of it. Now, Timothy returns to his family, and he tells Victoria that he liked the monk, and he seems to be okay with Piper's decision, but again, Victoria still isn't satisfied. Now, she promises that she'll support Piper's decision if Piper does a test run by staying overnight.
And if you still think this is a place where you want to spend a whole year, then do it. La-di-da.
as we see Locke agrees to stay with her as well. Now, I kind of figured in my last breakdown that Timothy would have this type of religious realization, but for a little bit here, again, he seemed to have this weight lifted off of his shoulders. But again, sometimes I feel like people use things like signs or religious encounters as a way to mask their denial. Meanwhile, Gaitak is outside the Ratliff Villa in hopes to find the gun while they're out of the villa. But before seeing if he's in the clear, we see Mook speaks with him, and she's excited about the opportunity he has with the shooting range. She's also even more excited about their first date that's going to be happening later that night. Now, as we watch him enter the villa and he searches for the gun, and I've said it once and I'll say it again, I'm a day one fan of the new theme song as it is incorporated into the scene briefly as we hear the beat just drops and it just sounds so dope. I don't understand how people don't like this new theme because it's just such a vibe. Now, after looking around, Gaitak finally finds the gun and he manages to escape without getting caught, but not before having to uncomfortably walk past Timothy and Victoria. Now, I thought him finding the gun was a little bit too easy for me, but I do think it's going to come back around. Like, we obviously know they have a bunch of video cameras and all this video footage that's always going around the hotel, so I could see it where it's going to be positioned where Gaitak either is looking like he stole something from them in their villa, or he's going to get blamed for planting something inside their villa, and if something bad happens to one of the family members, he's going to be the first person to point at. Now, going back inside the villa, we see Victoria confronts Timothy about siding with Piper on her decision.
You ready to shave her head and start banging a bongo in Times Square?
Timothy tells her that he wants them to experience life. Just in case they lost everything, they would have the integrity to continue to survive. Obviously, this having a deeper meaning for him because he knows what's happening back home, but him saying if they lost everything isn't something Victoria subscribes to, as she says that she wouldn't be able to live if that happened. Now, she goes on to say that at this point in her life, she does not have the will to live an uncomfortable life and never had that will to live a life without money or privilege. As we see, Timothy is at a loss of words because, again, he knows what's going on back home, and after his talk with the monk that really seemed to kind of lift his spirits, unfortunately, this conversation seemed to bring him back down to reality. Now, back at the pool, Chelsea takes notice of Saxon's vibe being off, but he blames it on his low energy, but he also says that he's still confused about why she didn't hook up with him the night before.
Hooking up with you would be an empty experience.
And how would you know that?
Because I know. Because you're soulless.
Now, Chelsea's saying to him that he's soulless, and you see the look on his face definitely says that her saying that really got to him, especially after what happened between him and his brother the night before. Now, Chloe arrives and she invites them to the get-together that Gary wants to have, as she tells them that Gary seemed to be turned on by the idea of one of the brothers hooking up with her, and here's where the conversation about the threesome comes up.
Are you kidding me? That was my little brother.
Yeah. And you guys made out.
He tells them that the kiss was just a joke and it was actually forced upon them, but then Chloe says this.
I didn't force him to jerk you off.
Saxon says that he was blacked out, but Chloe remembers everything, and Chelsea's reaction to him blaming the drugs and the alcohol and how there's no drug on earth that would never make her want to hook up with her brother was just hilarious to me. Look, I can't lie, yes, Saxon is a pompous, arrogant prick, but putting that aside, he didn't want anything to do with his brother and him hooking up, and if I'm being honest, I kind of feel bad for him in the moment. Look, again, to me, it's weird and gross and just disgusting as far as incest goes, but like I said all the way back in episode 1, that Locke had a thing for his brother. Now, to be clear, I'm not speaking on Lachlan's interest in men or women, like who you like. I've always lived that way, but incest to me is just flat out weird. Sorry, not sorry, but again, I am just curious to see how the brothers will handle this moving forward, and I'm not entirely sure on what the payoff's going to be. I would have much more preferred if Lachlan was hooking up with any other man or woman or both to find who he is and his sexual preference, but again, the brother angle is just kind of throwing me off. Now, sticking at the pool, we see Lori telling Kate that she has to talk to Jacqueline about the Valentine situation. Now, Jacqueline is literally sitting right next to them and she can hear them whispering about her, as we see Lori puts the cards on the table and she flat out asks how it was. Now, Jacqueline claims that nothing happened. He did come to her room for a little bit, but again, nothing happened as she claims. Lori calls her funny and questions if Harrison and her are in an open relationship, which is something I thought about a couple weeks ago, and she goes on about keeping this secret because what happens in Thailand stays in Thailand. You can just see the passive-aggressive behavior from Lori, like she's clearly upset, and even when she orders drinks, even though Kate didn't want one, we see her slap her on the arm and basically tells her to man up. Now we see Lori is definitely in her feelings. She's definitely on one right now. Like, she keeps going on wondering why Jacqueline pushed him on her, but we see why Jacqueline is a great actress as she keeps reflecting and pretending nothing happened, but she eventually pushes it back on Lori by obviously being mad about something, and this is clearly she has an attitude. Lori is taking shots at everyone at this point. She even throws Kate under the bus by mentioning she was the one who saw him leaving her room.
It's like nobody ever changes. We're still the same people we were in the 10th grade. It's just funny. It's funny. Not sure what that means, but okay. This is what you always did. Never mind. Forget it. It doesn't matter. What?
Now, this conversation is definitely not over, as Lori has changed her mind and she wants them to go to the fight, and she keeps pushing the matter, and it's clear that Jacqueline is upset about her husband finding out the possibility of what happened. Now, back in Jacqueline's room, we see Kate tries to settle things down, but Jacqueline isn't happy about the situation, and she shares her thoughts about Kate on gossiping.
How much gossip I have to deal with. And like my own friends, the few people that I think I can trust are talking shit about me behind my back. It's really depressing.
Cry me a river, Jacqueline. Like, this is exactly what they say, the pot calling the kettle black. You did the same thing in episode 1 and 2. I'm right now playing the world's smallest violin for Jacqueline's emotions. Like, they're all kind of being hypocritical to me right now, as they say it's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. Now back with Rick, he tells Frank the story about his dad, and he tells Frank how he wants his help. Now Frank tells him, like he told him last week, he's a different man, and we know that by his wonderful monologue last week, as Frank knows Rick plans on killing Jim if things go south, and he doesn't want to be a part of that mess. Now Rick tells him that he won't even bring the gun now to prove that he won't kill Jim, but all he wants to do is talk to him and tell him how badly he messed up his life. Now, as we head towards the end of this episode, back in the monastery, we see the monk instructing everyone, including Piper and Locke, to think about what's on their minds. As Locke replays the previous night of hooking up with Chloe and pleasuring his older brother, which to me confirms that he was fully aware of what was happening, but we see the monk tells them to release all of their thoughts. Now, during this, we see Saxon is stressing out about what happened the night before and the fact that now Chloe and Chelsea know, and it is freaking him the hell out. Now, as he walks back to the villa, I don't think it's a coincidence that this was cut between Guy Tak at the shooting range. It was almost positioned like he was shooting towards Saxon in a way, and possibly setting up some foreshadowing, or it could be positioned as maybe a metaphor for Saxon's ego being shot at. Now, to follow that up, this conversation that happens between Guy Tak and his supervisor to me was important because it's talking about him having this lack of a killer instinct because of his kindness. Now, Guy Tak claims that he thinks he has what it takes if push comes to shove, that he can kill someone if need be, but I 100% believe, and I know that this will come back into play at some point, and the chances that Guy Tak being involved in episode's 1 shootout to me seems pretty high at this point. Now, speaking of a killer, cut to Belinda having Greg literally popping out of nowhere, which catches her off guard. Now, he invites her to come over to the get-together and even encourages her to bring her son. Now, she makes up an excuse of why she can't go, but Greg tells her that eventually she should stop by because he thinks they should have a talk. Now, Belinda heads back to her room, and you can see that this interaction definitely got under her skin, and we don't see it, but I would imagine she finally told her son what happened between her and Tanya. I say that because thinking about episode 1's opening, maybe Zion was so afraid of his mother being involved in the shootout because maybe she decided to confront Greg. Now, going back to Greg/Gary inviting her to this get-together, I have a little bit of a wild theory. I bet that Gary set up to have some of those poisonous seeds put in some type of a dish or a drink to give to Belinda if she decided to go. Now, as we end this episode the same way we began, but instead of Timothy imagining him taking his own life, we see him daydreaming about taking his wife's life and his after. As Saxon invites his parents to the dinner party, and after seeing that daydream nightmare, I thought about this. Going back to my poison seeds comments a second ago, and knowing that Pam told the whole Ratliff family about how deadly those seeds can be in episode 1, is there a world where after speaking about death to the monk and how peaceful the thought of death can be and that it's like a homecoming, could Timothy take that as a literal metaphor of them not going back home to America, but instead killing his whole family via those poisonous seeds to avoid facing the suffering back home. Is that too far? Is that too dark for the show? I mean, we literally saw 2 unaliving moments in one episode alone, so I don't think it's too far-fetched. As we end with Rick and Frank arriving to the Hollinger's house, now I had to suspend my disbelief in the fact that their security team didn't even bother to check them before entering their home. As we see, Steve introduces himself as we finally get to meet Jim. As the camera slowly comes in on Rick's face as we hear Jim speaking in the background, who, by the way, will be played by the incredible Scott Glenn, as the look on his face looks like the third bad luck Chelsea was in fear of is coming true. Welcome to my breakdown of episode 7 of season 3 of The White Lotus. Who's got the killer instinct in this penultimate episode? As we see characters making some really dumb and irresponsible decisions, while some of them make no decisions at all. As Timothy continues to fantasize about death, we learn what Gary's dreams are about, and we finally find out who robbed the hotel. There's a lot that we've got to discuss in the second to last episode, so let's break it all down. Spoilers ahead. Now, we open with a quick glimpse into the Muay Thai fight that's seen throughout this episode and used as a backdrop to represent both the mental and physical battles that our main characters are going through. We transition back into following up with Rick and Frank at the Hollinger's house, as Jim introduces himself to Steve the director, who we see makes sure that Rick is doing okay and has his emotions under control. As they make some small talk and briefly talk about Jacqueline's show on television, and they discuss Steve's previous films, which includes some made-up trilogy, as Steve pivots into describing the movie and Shatala's role.
She is a former prostitute. She's very formidable because she knows all the secrets of all the most powerful men in Thailand. She's tough. She's brilliant. A knockout, obviously.
And she sings.
Now, after the misunderstanding of what Rick told Shatala, we see Frank requesting a whiskey to drink to help him through the process, even though we know he's been sober for almost a year. Meanwhile, we see Rick is trying to do his best and keeping his composure in line around Jim. Now, this is cut between the monk talking about how anyone is capable of killing someone, but how the Buddhist scripture is against every form of violence. You'll notice how the show has Lachlan, Gaitak, Mook, and Timothy on the screen when this is being said. To me, that was deliberate because I feel like all of them are hiding something, and I believe we're going to see all of them making a decision come to the finale that no one would expect from them in a violent point of view. Now, the nighttime fun begins as Gaitak and Mook head out for their first date, and the Ratliff family make their way to Gary Gregg's get-together, and we see Victoria couldn't be happier to being around the boat people again. We cut to Belinda, who's filled Zion in on everything about Gregg, and he believes that they should accept his invite and see what he has to tell her.
Look, if you don't go tonight, he's just gonna come looking for you again. I say we just get it over with.
He knows I know.
Mom, he's not gonna do anything to you, all right? Because I'll be there. Let's just go see what he has to say.
Now, if I'm being honest, I don't know if I would be so gung-ho on going to a person's house after knowing or at least having a strong inkling that they killed their wife, and I know I definitely wouldn't be okay with my kid being involved. Now, catching up with the ladies, they're out for dinner at the hotel as they learn that Fabian will be their entertainment for the evening. Now, it's pretty clear that there's an uncomfortable tension between Jacqueline and Lori after the sleepover situation, and we see Lori is ready for the drinks for the night and she wants to get her mind off of everything that's transpired. Now, back in Bangkok, I feel bad for Frank, y'all, because he's really trying his best to be the fake director who claimed to have seen and studied Shatala's previous films, but man, Rick really screwed him over by not giving him much to work with. I mean, he couldn't give Frank a title of one of her movies or one of the characters she played. I mean, it was a really shitty recon on Rick's end. Now, it didn't take much, but we see Rick convinces Jim for them to have a solo conversation elsewhere about how he handled business in Thailand for all these years. Now, by the ease in which Jim agreed to have this side conversation with a complete stranger, at that point, I was certain that the Hollingers were fully aware that this was all a ruse, and it was just a matter of time before they called them out on their BS, but by the way things play out in this episode, that never happened and they completely seem to be gullible about the whole situation. Now in Jim's den, we see him sharing his experiences with doing business in Thailand and how when he was younger, he had to do these reckless type of things. He had this level of hunger and determination and how he didn't let things stop him from getting things done and how he handled things when things got difficult.
You hit a roadblock, you had a lot of options.
And if somebody got in your way, made your life difficult.
Lots of ways to take care of that. I'm more careful now.
Now, it's pretty clear that there's two conversations going on within this scene. One, we have Jim, who doesn't really take much from the conversation they're having about business in Thailand. But then you look at Rick, and we know that all of this has a deeper meaning for him, and especially the answers he's getting from Jim. And you can just see that it's making him more upset because of the tone in which Jim is answering him. And also, there's this sense of carelessness from his past that we can see is clearly affecting Rick. Now, as he's getting more upset, we notice that Rick is repositioning the gun from his jacket to his waist. Now, as the Rattlers arrive to the party, we see Chloe immediately asks where Lachlan is, and you can see she's slightly disappointed that he wasn't there, and we find out why that is a little bit later in the episode. Now, Saxon continues to try to get Chelsea to like him as they talk for a bit, and here's where we finally get the backstory about how Chelsea and Rick first met, as she explains what she saw in him.
First day we met, he told me his whole life story, and I just knew we were meant to be together. He has this sadness. It really touches me. I want to heal him. It's like we're in this yin and yang battle. I'm hope, and Rick is pain, and eventually one of us will win.
Again, using the analogy of how the physical fight was shown and cut throughout the episode, here we learn that Chelsea is in her own fight. She's trying to fight for Rick's hope and happiness, but he can't seem to accept anything peaceful because of the battle within himself about what happened to him as a kid growing up without his parents. Now, hearing Chelsea's reasonings to being with Rick, I think we've all kind of known her why to a certain extent for most of this season, and maybe we know people, or hell, maybe we are those people who have a similar mindset to where they think they can fix people that are dealing with their own issues. Now, personally, I find those type of people that want to fix people, and I can be guilty of that. I have done that in the past. I honestly find that to be a slightly toxic trait to have. I say that because those individuals, and I'll throw myself in that bin, most likely knows whoever that person they're trying to fix most of the time aren't going to be emotionally available, and getting to them can take so much time and effort, and really getting to their actual core values will be a struggle. Again, I've been victim of that. I've played that game before and I failed at it. So now the question is, why even put yourself through that draining process? At least Chelsea seems to be aware that there's a possibility she's going to lose that battle with Rick, and it could be more foreshadowing for him being the reason she could be this season's dead character. But let me know in the comments if you all can relate to Chelsea, or if you've been her at some point, or you are her now, and you can understand where she's coming from. Let's talk about it in the comments below. Now, during that conversation, we see Timothy and Gary share a brief conversation, and while that's happening, we see Saxon watches from afar and watches his dad drinking as he pulls his dad aside to have a talk with him. Meanwhile, Gary notices that Belinda has arrived, yet another set of characters having their own battle to deal with. Now, on their date, we see Gaitak tells Mook that he's not going to be getting the promotion that she believed that he was getting. He also tells her that he's not going to be a bodyguard either because he was told he's too soft and he doesn't have a killer instinct, and he seems to agree with that. He tells her how he didn't instinctually want to fight back during the robbery because of his Buddhist beliefs and how it's condemned to use violence, as we heard earlier in this episode from the monk. Now, Mook, on the other hand, shares how she believes the opposite and how it should be in his best interest to embrace the harshness of the world and that he shouldn't be afraid of using violence if it's needed in his job. Now, she seems to be disappointed by his lack of assertion and his drive to be more ambitious and having to do what it takes to move around in this world. Again, there's been a charm, there's a cuteness, there's a friendliness that we've seen from Mook all season long, and just knowing how popular Lisa is in real life, I'm starting to think that the whole big shootout that we know is coming will most likely have her being a key part of it, and maybe we'll see a more violent side of that particular character as well. Now, back at dinner, I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't spend much time with Fabian's singing debut, but to replace that, we got to see the polite gloves being taken off as Lori finally gets to the root of her problems about the Jacqueline situation, and she tells Jacqueline that the whole situation makes her not trust her. Now, Lori mentions how Jacqueline threw herself at Dave at her wedding over a decade ago, and based on Kate's response, Dave is her current husband. Now, the conversation gets a little bit more personal, and it switches up on Lori as Jacqueline calls her out for not allowing her life to get better, and she even talks about how she just accepts things without much pushback on her life, and we even see Kate throws in her 2 cents and she agrees with Jacqueline's assessment about her.
If you always choose the short stick, is it bad luck? Are you life's victim? Or are you doing it to yourself?
And, when you know someone long enough, you do start to see certain patterns. The source of your disappointment changes, but the constant is you're always disappointed.
Now, Lori feels backed in a corner and she swings back and she calls them out by telling Kate that she's fake and she pretends her life is perfect. She also tells Jacqueline that she's vain and she's also selfish. Now, Lori's fed up with the both of them and we watch as she decides to leave the table and she wants to head off to the fight instead of spending the rest of the night with her so-called friends. Now, at this point in the show, we've all come to expect at least one standout funny moment from Victoria, and we get this here as she wants to be a hero and save the young woman she met back on the boat from the older man that she's dating. Now, Victoria offers to bring this young lady back to North Carolina with her so she can introduce her to some more respectable men for her to date. It was almost like Victoria was trying to pimp her out of what she believes isn't a good relationship for her to currently be in. Now, meanwhile, we see Belinda agrees to go inside to speak to Greg privately. Now, surprisingly, we see Greg finally comes clean, to a certain extent, about admitting to remembering Belinda and his ties to Tanya as he tells her,
Tanya talked about you a lot. I always felt guilty that she didn't start that business with you. And I know that she'd want you to have some money to do that.
I can't lie, this was a very smart move by Gary Gregg, a very smart move to make his problem a solution to Belinda's problem. As he offers Belinda $100,000 to finally start in her business, and in exchange, Belinda will let go of any knowledge of knowing him and letting him live in peace. Now, Belinda wants to sleep on this before making any decisions, and you can tell that Greg is shocked that she didn't say yes to his offer. As Belinda finds her son and she wants to leave this party immediately as we see Greg watches them from afar. So, question, if this was you and whether it was $100,000 for a startup business that you always wanted to get going, or it was a down payment for your dream car or your dream house, or to pay for your kids' tuition, or to pay off your debts, or whatever desire you have, are you taking that bribe or that hush money, or are you doing what she did and potentially risking him taking measures to ensure his secret is safe, which could lead to her and her son, both of them, being harmed? Let me know what would you do in this situation in the comments below. Now, last week, Timothy saw firsthand just how helpless his wife would be without their money, and now he gets another example, but this time it comes from his son. As Saxon wants assurances that everything at work is going okay, and if it's not, he believes he's not going to have anything else to offer in life.
Dad, I don't have anything else but this. I don't have any interests. I don't have any hobbies. Okay, if I'm not a success, then I'm nothing. And I can't handle being nothing. I put my whole life into this basket, into your basket, Dad. So if something's up, just, was something up?
Now, Timothy lies again straight into his son's face about what's really happening back home. But again, the important thing to note is that Timothy gets to see just how little of a killer instinct some of his family members don't have to survive without their money, which just adds more fuel to my theory that I shared in my last breakdown of Timothy convincing himself that by killing his family, he's doing them a favor by protecting them from what's back home. Now, back at the Hollanders, we see Frank and Chitala watching her old tapes of her performing while dancing and singing to both folk and rap music, and it being a mixture of MC Hammer meets Peter Pan, as Frank says. Now, during this, we see Jim talks about how he spoils both of his daughters, as Rick finally comes clean about why he's here, and he goes into the first time he heard of Jim's name.
I was 10 years old when my mother was dying. Gloria Hatchet. Name ring a bell?
Gloria Hatchet.
Now at this point, Rick pulls out the gun and he points it in Jim's face and he moves closer to him. Now Rick holds back from pistol whipping Jim, and we learn why he does that a little bit later in the episode, but he decides to flip the chair that Jim is sitting in and he falls to the floor as we watch Rick immediately runs away with Frank. Now, I have a few thoughts about that scene. When Rick mentioned his mother's name, you notice how Jim acted as he either never heard of that woman ever before in his entire life, or he remembered her and didn't remember her having a husband, and this could point to the theory that a lot of you all have, which is that Jim is Rick's actual father. Now, another thing about that scene, I'm going to be honest with you all, I thought it was extremely anticlimactic, and I thought it was kind of lame to just watch Rick flip over his chair and just leave him there for Jim to get his lick back on Rick eventually. Again, I just feel like Rick didn't think any of this over properly. Like, does he not remember that his girlfriend is currently staying at Jim's hotel and could easily get all of his information from the records that they have on file? And again, leaving Chelsea at risk. Again, I just gotta say, I feel like the whole plan that Rick came up with is just so idiotic. From the director angle and giving him little to no information to how he handled this Jim confrontation, I definitely think the third bad luck that Chelsea has been speaking of will come to fruition, and it's gonna be in the form of Jim getting his revenge. Or again, going back to you all's theories about Jim being Rick's father, maybe he deep down inside knows that this is his son, and maybe they're going to have a more peaceful confrontation, but things are going to go sideways because maybe Rick and Jim and his bodyguards get into some big confrontation, which may lead to the big shootout. Now, we finally get to see the actual fight, but more importantly, we get to see our main characters in attendance. Again, we see Mook is talking to Gaitak about the natural nature of humans to fight. While they're talking, we see that Lori is in the crowd and she's sitting next to Valentine, and we see his friends Vlad and Alexei arrive. And as I predicted all the way back in my breakdown of episode 2, check out this clip. So going back to Valentine, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a connection between him and the robbers, and I wouldn't be surprised if when we see Gaitak go to the fight that maybe the fighter is the one that was involved in the robbery, or at the very least, I bet Gaitak sees one of them at the fight and it'll be revealed that one of them were actually involved. As Gaitak looks around and he notices that Vlad was the same bald guy he saw from the robbery, and he pieces it together that Valentine must have had his head in the robbery as he distracted him, like I figured. Now the question is, what exactly will Gaitak do with this information? Will he bottle it up and take that to his grave, or will he have to tap into that killer instinct and he's going to confront them, or, as we'll discuss later, maybe another robbery happens and we're going to see Gaitak react in a more violent way. Now, as I've expressed in the past, I'm not the biggest Piper subplot fan of how they're handling it. It's just not as compelling to me as the other stories, but we do get a few scenes at the monastery in this penultimate episode, and again, it just didn't move the needle for me at all. But one of the last few scenes that we get within that subplot, we see the siblings settling in, and we see Piper hearing from Lachlan about what he thinks about this experience, and he thinks that it's all pretty great. Now, to her surprise, Lachlan tells her that he actually wants to stay in Thailand. He doesn't want to lean into his darkness, and he doesn't want to return home ever, and he wants to stay with Piper. Again, she's at a loss of words, and she's not all that excited about the news as she leaves her brother alone to leave him with his thoughts. Again, the whole Piper subplot has been my least favorite aspect of this season, but I do think the particular scene that we just talked about speaks more about Lachlan and him yet again being rejected by one of his siblings. Look, Lachlan's lost. He's not sure about his sexual preferences. He's not sure about his beliefs. And twice now, he tried to go down the path that his brother was on, but he got rejected. And now he tried to go down the religious road with Piper, but again, he got rejected. And he just doesn't have a clue on who he wants to be. Now look, this doesn't excuse what happened between Lachlan and his brother, but there's a level of understanding that this 18-year-old, we've all been 18-year-old, we've all been kids not knowing what we want to do with our life, not to the extent of what we see in this show, obviously, but again, he's looking for guidance from this very dysfunctional family, and it'll be interesting to see what comes of Lachlan in the finale, and if he'll be the Ratliff member that ends up dying. Now, from one lost Ratliff member to another, back at the party, we learn why Chelsea was a bit upset about Lachlan's absence, as she shares with both Saxon and Chelsea that her and Gary had a heart-to-heart about his very messed up childhood fantasy.
When he was a kid, his parents used to have loud sex, like all the time, and they would leave their door open. He would then stand outside their door and just watch his dad go to town on his mom.
We learned that Greg Gary became obsessed with the idea that the women that he dated were cheating on him, and he hoped to catch them in the act. Which leads to Chelsea inviting Sexton to stay to have sex with her while Gary watches and fulfills his dreams and trying to tap into his childhood trauma. Whether it's Greg Gary or Chloe or Chelsea who's encouraging this to happen, which is just wild to me, but I got a good laugh out of that scene, and I got even a bigger laugh when the camera pans to Gary watching as he's smirking at Saxon, hoping that he says yes. So that answers the question to what Gary wanted from Chloe from last week's episode. Now, ultimately, we see Saxon, at the moment, declines this offer as he decides to leave. Now, that reveal wasn't as crazy, nor as great or as wild as Frank's sexual fantasies, but at the same time, it was still pretty damn hilarious, and maybe as equally freaky as hell.
Hey, run for your life, freaky ass nigga, he a 69 god.
Now, speaking of Frank, we see him and Rick living in the moment, as Rick tells Frank how he couldn't even hit Jim because he wasn't this big bad boogeyman that he made up in his head to be, but instead he was just this old frail man, and after their little exchange, we see Rick's got the closure that he wanted. Now, to celebrate, we see Frank invites Rick to have some drinks and to have some fun with the night like they used to do back in the day. Now, back with Belinda, we see Zion encouraging his mom to take the money, but Belinda doesn't want to have anything to do with a murderer. Zion tries to remind his mom what she could do with that money, but more importantly, he reminds her that if she doesn't come to terms with Greg, she'll or both of them will most likely end up dead like Tanya. Now, I can't lie, Zion was speaking facts, but I understand Belinda's position and her feelings on tying herself to a murderer, and knowing that she took money and that stayed on her conscience, and also who's to say by accepting that money that Greg won't end up holding that over her, or even worse, he still might decide to have her killed. To me, this is the perfect definition of being between a rock and a hard place. Now, we continue to get more fighting or more disagreeing going on as we see Kate and Jacqueline aren't on the same page of what happened at the dinner with Lori.
It's fine. I'll be the bad guy. I'm used to it.
Now, admittedly, I know we still got the finale to look forward to with this particular plot with the ladies and them having their big blowout fight, but I was hoping that at this point in the season, that big fight between them would have happened already, and the fallout would have been seen in the finale, but obviously it looks like that isn't the case, that we're going to be seeing both of those things happening in next week's episode. At least I hope that's the case. Now, after Gary's get together, we see Saxon keeps at it, and he wants to prove to Chelsea that she's got the wrong impression of him as he wants to show her. As he manages to get in her room, and we see her trying to show him to tap into more of himself, to tap more into his mind, into his spirit, and his body. And look, we know Saxon. He tries to be slick, and he tries to make a move on her, but she peeps game, and she has him leave, and she remains loyal to her relationship with Rick, and she tries to call him, but yet again, she has no luck at doing so. Which, speaking of, we see Rick and Frank tapping into their old times and having a good time at the club, and eventually they take the party to their room with a bunch of ladies, drugs, and alcohol, and we see Rick is smiling. Now, was that smile from the whole situation that went down with Jim? Was that a smile about what he's currently doing? He's having fun with his friend, or is it a mixture of both? And will Rick do the opposite of what Chelsea did, and will he cheat on her in this moment? Now, after being called out for not sleeping with Valentine, we see Lori not missing out on her second chance at getting some, as we see that she's having sex with Alexei. Which is kind of funny because remember Jacqueline mentioning her bad luck with picking men? Well, we see that happening yet again. Now look, I'm happy Lori got it in. We don't know how long it's been, but it seemed like it was a while, and again, I'm happy for her. But still, her deciding to go to this dude's house that she just met a day or two ago was so stupid in my opinion, and also so dangerous of a decision that she made. And I get it. She's trying to prove a point to herself, but also to her friends, but again, that could have ended really badly, and it almost did. as we see them sharing pillow talk together, and we see Alexei going over his sob story about his mother being stuck in his home country and that she's also sick. It doesn't stop there because he needs $10,000 to cover her costs of coming to where he is and taking care of her, and this fool asks Lori if she can help. Now in comes a girl we met who was arguing with him at the club as Lori has to sneak out through the back window. But before she leaves and gets smacked in the head and the face while doing so, while she was hiding in the closet, you all would notice that she saw a bunch of jewelry on his drawer. It's a pretty safe bet. Get it? Safe bet because of the robbery. Anyway, it's a pretty safe bet that that's the same jewelry that was stolen from the hotel. And this makes Alexei the guy with the gun that actually stole the jewelry. Now, based on that little story she gave Lori, it seems like they are definitely playing these ladies the whole time and running some type of scheme to get money off of them. Now, the question is, did Valentine sleep with Jacqueline to get leverage over her? Will this be a situation where he's going to try to blackmail her and maybe reveal that he recorded them and them having sex that night, and he's going to leak the tape online if she doesn't give him the $10,000 that Alexei asked for? Now, this feels a bit repetitive, but we end this episode the same way we ended it before, where we see Timothy continuing to having dreams about killing his family by shooting both Victoria and Saxton dead before shooting himself. But I will admit, this time around it is a little bit different because he actually seems to want to follow through with that fantasy as he goes to look for the gun, but of course we know it's gone, and he now knows that because he can't find it, and now he has to come up with another way to end his and his family's life.
But I was never too worried. Because amor fati. You know what that means?
I don't know what that means.
It means you have to embrace your fate, good or bad. Whatever will be, will be. And at this point, we're linked, so if a bad thing happens to you, it happens to me.
Welcome to my breakdown of episode 8 in the season 3 finale of The White Lotus. All of the season's main and side characters are all connected according to Chelsea, and even though they're all a part of different groups, all of their respective stories come to a close in this finale that sees some people leaving this vacation change forever, for better or worse. There is a lot to go over in this final episode, so let's break it all down. Spoilers ahead. We open this finale with the calmness and beautifulness of the morning as we get these establishing shots that lead into the monastery as we find Piper, who's just waking up, and we see Lachlan walking in, who's already up to hear the lessons of the monk. What's interesting about this opening scene and its meaning for later on in the episode is the fact that the roles of the characters have been reversed. Piper was the one that came to Thailand as the one who claimed to have found religion in Buddhism, whereas Lachlan was lost and had no connection to any god or any religion until now. As the monk speaks of awakening to anxiety and an edgy energy about the fears of what the day brings and questioning the controllables we think we have over our lives. As we get these shots of some of our characters who are undoubtedly questioning their next moves in life. Now in Bangkok, we see that it appears that last week's smile on Rick's face was one of someone who's done with the partying and drinking because he's found something else, something more important, and that being Chelsea, as he slept in the other room away from all the debauchery. He sees Frank in the living room still having fun with the women of the night, and it's clear that he's fallen off the wagon and gone back to his old ways thanks to his old friend Rick. Now Frank tries to convince Rick to stay with him and have more fun as more women arrive, but Rick is done, and he says without actually saying it, but in my mind he's done with everything that comes with this particular lifestyle because again, he's got something more important to him now in his life. Now, immediately, yes, Frank's a grown-ass man and he makes his own decisions, but I feel like this is another example of how Rick has affected characters' lives for the worse. Obviously, one being Chelsea and Jim, who we'll talk about later, but in this scene, he was the one technically responsible for dragging Frank back into this mess, and he's not willing to at least try to get Frank to stop. Rick to me is definitely not only a shitty boyfriend, but also a terrible friend in general. Now back at the hotel, we see Guy Talk telling Mook that he's planning to actually take an action and telling his supervisor that he has valuable information about the robbery, and you can tell that this excites her because of her feelings of her wanting him to take action and getting that promotion. Now it's important to keep moments in mind like this for the character Guy Talk because it hints at a decision that he makes later in the episode, which is him committing an act of violence. We see Jacqueline finds Kate outside and wonders if she's seen Lori, who's been MIA since the previous night, and instead of for Kate checking in on her, I believe for the first time since being on this vacation, we see Jacqueline doing the checking in instead. Now Jacqueline tries to wake up Lori and invite her to eat with them, but Lori still wants to get some more sleep from her long crazy night, as this is where Jacqueline finally apologizes for sleeping with Valentine. Now to take things even further, we see Jacqueline says to Lori that she wants to be her friend. Now I think she's speaking in the sense of acknowledging her feelings and not brushing them under the rug, which is something that she's most likely done to Lori in the past. Now the question is, will Lori take that interaction as something that was genuine or something that comes from a fake facade that they've built for one another? Now as Piper and Lachlan head back to the villa, he tells his sister his plans on when he plans on telling his mom, but here's where Piper basically gives him his answer from the night before on how she feels about his decision.
Lachlan, I don't want to be responsible for fucking up your life, okay? Just let me fuck my own life, all right?
Now, while this is under different circumstances, to me, this being another example of Lachlan trying to please one of his siblings by joining Piper, but again, he's met with another disappointment by discovering that he's not fully accepted by them by trying to be them or take on hobbies or life changes that they've taken on. Now, speaking of trying to fit in, we see Saxon has blown through most of the book that Chelsea gave him in the previous episode, as it appears that he's actually trying to really impress her, but instead of materialistic things like money, he's trying to impress her by his intellect. But we see that he's slightly embarrassed for others to see what he's reading as he hides the book from his family and watches as Piper tries to avoid answering her mother's question about how their night went at the monastery. Now, from one character looking for answers to another, we cut to Punchai, who's formally introduced to Zion. Now, Punchai doesn't necessarily have anything in particular to tell Belinda besides hello, which is basically code for, I really like you and I can't stop thinking about the other night and I hope you stay and open that business with me, and oh yeah, Zion, I'm gonna be your new stepdad. Now, after he leaves, we see Zion immediately picks up on the vibes of this puppy love. Now, Belinda brings up the offer that Punchai gave her about opening the business together, and she's still in the mindset that Greg's offer isn't worth the risk, but here we see Zion stays persistent and convinces his mom to renegotiate the offer with Greg, but this time around, Zion will play the middleman and use his college degree in business. Again, I said it before, but I'm such a big fan of this dynamic between Zion and Belinda. I really enjoy their chemistry on screen, and obviously we'll talk about them more later in this breakdown. But man, it's moments like this and what we see later in the episode that I wish that we could have spent more time with them from the beginning of this season. Now at the Ratliff table, Victoria forces Timothy to try to pry out of Piper how the night really went, and she initially pretends that it went well. Now, instead of downplaying Piper's experience, we see Timothy's actually leaning into what happened, even though this is against Victoria's advice, but he also still wants that validation from his family members that they don't need money to survive. But we end up seeing Piper actually says her truth, and she admits that she is a princess and she didn't like the food nor the sleeping arrangements, and the look on Timothy's face says it all. First it was his wife, then it was his oldest son, now it's Piper, yet another family member who's nothing without their money and can't live with the simplest things to get by, and she begins to even cry in this moment. While Victoria couldn't be happier, Timothy's only got one more member of his family to question if money is all that matters to determine if he's going to ultimately take out all of their lives. Now, I spoke to this in my full uncut live reaction the other night, but I don't personally think Piper's reaction makes her a bad person. But instead, she's a victim of her environment and accustomed to privileges that she's been born with. If anything, I look more to the parenting style of Timothy and Victoria of raising their children to only knowing one way of life and having things handed to them versus the other way around, and Piper's really getting that first experience of seeing how life would be without mommy and daddy being around. Now, after avoiding his brother for most of the last few days, we finally get to hear from one of them about that night. Now, if you notice something earlier in this conversation, it's the subtle mention from Lachlan about willingly drinking one of his brother's smoothies, which is obviously foreshadowing for later. Now, after telling his younger brother that no one's going to make him a man, he has to do that on his own, and we see Saxon's back to leave, but this is where Lachlan confronts his older brother about the silent treatment he's been giving him.
Like, it's okay for you to, worship me, but don't, worship me.
Now, Lachlan mans up in this moment and he tells his brother that all he cared about was getting off, and he thought that he was helping him by doing that because, as it was said weeks ago, he's a people pleaser. Saxon cuts off his brother and never wants to speak about this ever again. It was so interesting to me to see that the very next scene is of Lori looking down at her friends at the pool and knowing her monologue later in this episode about finding religion and God and people and work, and paralleling that to Lachlan's scene where he sees some form of self through pleasing his brother and sister, even if it's against what he actually wants. Listen, I can't say I fully understand his reasons why to doing what he did, but I feel like this to me told me that he was never physically attracted to his actual brother, but instead it was his own way of literally thinking that he was doing the simplest thing by pleasing him in that moment, but wasn't thinking beyond that moment and thinking about the mental ramifications of his actions. As we come to the end of the first act of this episode, we see Guy Talk trying to actually do his job as she questions Valentine about the names of the men he saw him with the night before, planting the seed in Valentine's head that he knows exactly who they are and his involvement in the robbery, as Valentine doesn't break for now as he goes on about his day. Now at this point, Saxon knows his normal routine of how he normally gets women's attention hasn't been working on Chelsea, and he now is trying something more personal as he lets her know that he's almost finished reading the book that she gave him the night before. Now, Chelsea is actually impressed by Saxon, but she still isn't falling for his game, which I will say I do believe he's actually trying with her and not being a douche, but unfortunately for him, Chelsea's taken as she sees Rick and runs in his arms. Now, before moving on, it wasn't until my second rewatch that I noticed this. In this moment where Chelsea talks to Saxon about this book that reads about the universe and how people are in groups, as she says to him,
But the laws of the universe, how we're all connected. She has this theory that there are different groups, and we're in these groups with people we know and people we don't know. And these groups are working together to fulfill this divine plan.
To me, this is the show's reasoning to who lives and who died. It was all meant to be, and those who died later in this episode were all meant to be a part of this group that Chelsea spoke about. Now, while I'm still going to personally blame Rick for literally everything that happens at the end of this episode, I think the creator and writer and director of the show, Mike Wright, is trying to tell us as the viewers that no matter how it happened, it was always meant to happen because it was predetermined. Now, as Saxon watches this very romantic moment between these two characters, I think it was here that he finally realized that Chelsea is fully committed in this relationship, but more importantly, and he never confirms this, but I believe she's changed his life moving forward. I honestly think that he's found this new appreciation of how to approach people in life. His whole philosophy that he spoke to his younger brother about weeks ago about the nonsense of being in people's life and giving them what they want even though they don't want it, he now has a better understanding that life has more to it, especially when you have someone that you're interested in. It's more than the physical attractions, but to some people, as we see with Chelsea, it's more about the mental and the spiritual bonds that people can make. Also love that we have this moment where we see Saxon realizing something that has changed him, and it's almost reminiscent to what we saw with Daphne in season 2, where we first met these characters and they seem so set in their ways, and obviously they're two different characters, Daphne and Saxon, but to me they were the most unexpected character developments over the course of their respective seasons. It appears that Rick seems to be a brand new man after his encounter with Jim, and as of now he's really turned over a new leaf. Meanwhile, we see Saxon apologizing to Chloe about not accepting Greg's offer as she tells him,
It's fine. We'll find someone else.
This to me proves my point even further, that him literally seeing how physical attraction can only go so far and people move on from one person to the next without making a real connection. This again was something I really come to appreciate on a rewatch, and that's coming to appreciate Saxon's arc over this season. Now, this was something I picked up on my rewatch, and it's a really quick scene, but before Timothy tests Lachlan, we see Piper shopping with her mother and her encouraging her to buy whatever she wants as a reward for not deciding to stay in Thailand. Which again is just more proof for Timothy that his family isn't built for a life without money. Now, after being left disappointed by every single member of his family, Timothy has a question for Lachlan.
I think you could live with no money. I mean, no money. No house. Nothing.
Yeah, I think I could.
Now, after that response, Timothy encourages his son to enjoy the rest of his last day in Thailand, and this right here is the face of a man who's at least happy that he's got one member who's not all reliant on money, and he's thinking at least one person can carry on his family legacy. Look, at least one of Timothy's kids turned out okay, minus the sibling hand job, of course. Now, as I broke down weeks ago, the side effects of lorazepam were causing paranoia, impaired memory, judgment coordination, but also causing suicidal thoughts. As we've seen those thoughts being fantasized over the past few episodes, but now it comes into reality as Timothy takes the sack of seeds from the deadly fruit and blends it into the blender for later. Meanwhile, we see Valentine comes clean to Gaitak, and like his friend Alexei, he tells him this story.
Please don't say anything. If you do, I'm dead. They will deport me, I go back to my country, I'm dead. My friends, all of us are dead. They can't work, they have no way to make money here. If you say something, you're killing me.
To me, I feel like this was just made up. He was just trying to give him a sob story so he wouldn't turn him in, which we'll see later on it actually works. But this conversation is interrupted by Fabian telling him to see if Jacqueline will be okay with her taking pictures with Sir Tala, who's returning with her husband soon. Now, this is my favorite scene of the episode, as we watch Zion showing off his talent and demands control of the room and most of the conversation. He's here to talk business and get to the bottom line. Now, Zion, being the smart man that he is, he starts the conversation off light by explaining to Greg his mother's plights, and he knows his first offer won't be enough, but instead, they're going to need $5 million.
$5 million.
I had a really good, no, not good, a great laugh from this scene. Now, Greg denies their new offer, but my man Zion came prepared as he brings up Tanya's net worth, and bringing Tanya's name up seems to really bother his mother Belinda as she gets up and seamlessly ends this negotiation. But as Zion is forced to leave with his mom, we find out that this was Belinda actually taking charge and using this as a strategy to make Greg agree to the new terms. In this moment, I said to myself, this is where Belinda finally got her hands dirty. She scammed the ultimate scammer out of his own money, or should I say out of his ex-wife's money, essentially doing what he did to Tanya all the way back in season 1. Now look, morally speaking, yes, it was wrong for her to take the money to negotiate with Greg, who essentially killed and murdered his wife, but I don't give a damn. Nor does Belinda. This, if you think about it, she doesn't owe Tanya any alliance. Like, they weren't like best friends. They didn't grow up together. So at the end of the day, most of these characters in this show are morally great characters. And Belinda, for better or for worse, she allowed the money to take over to chase and pursue her own dreams. Now back with Gaitak, he admits to Mook that he's not built for this job and he's thinking about quitting. Now she doesn't want him to quit, especially after all the years that he's put in at this job, and she goes on to say that she thought that he was different and wanted to be successful, but it seems that he lacks the confidence to do so. As we watch him invite her to another date, but all of a sudden her mother's back has been hurting and she wants to reschedule it. This, like earlier, being another character experiencing letting someone they care about down and the rejection getting to them and making them force themselves to conforming into the person that they want them to be instead of for who they are. Essentially, folding under pressure. As we come to the tail end of the second half of this episode, it is now time for the guests of the White Lotus to have their final dinner, or some would say their final supper, as we watch Timothy takes the last of the lorazepam. Now at dinner, we see Timothy makes a request.
Fun for me, cocktails in the room later. Pina coladas. You can bring some rum and mixers to the villa, get them sent there.
As he sets forth his plans to end their vacation in a very unexpected way and lets Locke know that he won't be drinking tonight. Now before we say goodbye to our last scene with our group of friends, we see Valentine awkwardly inviting them to take in the photo with the owners the following morning, and this being the first time that Valentine and Jacqueline have spoken since hooking up. Meanwhile, we see Belinda on her phone checking to see if Greg sent her over the money, and we also have a very important moment between Chelsea and Rick. We see Chelsea is still on cloud 9 about his newfound self, and we know that she's happy and knowing that she won the war for Rick's heart and joy, and tells him that she wasn't worried about losing because of the title of this episode.
More fatty. Embrace your fate, good or bad.
Remember what she said earlier to Saxon, and know after saying that, followed by this,
I think we're going to be together forever, don't you?
this to me was her officially sealing her fate. Just remember what Chelsea told Rick all the way back in episode 1, where she told him that she will give him back his joy no matter if it kills her. But the moment that got me, if I'm being honest, is when Rick tells her that the plan is for them to be together forever, which obviously is a callback to later and seals their fate together forever. But to me, this was earned. Like, if I'm being honest, and I'll talk about this further later, but this relationship to me was the most tragic, but also had some real emotions that I feel were earned throughout the entire season. Again, calling back to my initial reaction after seeing the episode for the first time on Sunday night and doing my live stream, I felt the closure here for the ladies wasn't satisfying, but again, after a rewatch, I feel differently now. As we watch both Kate and Jacqueline sharing their thoughts about how grateful they are that they're on this trip together and being happy in the moment. As Lori takes the time to share her feelings about how the vacation has been going, as she tells them,
"It's funny because if I'm being honest, all week I've just been so sad. I just feel like my expectations were too high, or I just feel like as you get older, you have to justify your life, you know? I have no belief system, and I've had a lot of them, but work was my religion for forever, but I definitely lost my belief there. And then I tried love. It's a painful religion, just made everything worse. And then, even for me, just like being a mother, that didn't save me either."
I'm not gonna lie, I thoroughly enjoyed this monologue from Lori. Even on my first watch, it was something that really stood out to me because the part about her using others to believe in or to put her faith in as a form of religion really spoke to me. And Carrie Coon's delivery in the scene was quite profound. Now again, I initially didn't like the closure that we got with this particular plot with our friend group that I was hoping for, but watching Lori talking about being in the moment and the appreciation of the now and putting aside their past differences or what can happen in the future, but living in the present and how they're loving the time they have one another, I still don't feel 100% satisfied, but I do appreciate it a little bit better now as we watch them together and happy, even if this is the last time they're going to be together as friends. And that's the key of it all. Friendship has its highs and lows, its ups and downs, its good days and bad days. But again, I came to appreciate this a little bit more, even though I felt like there were some unresolved things that weren't spoken of that was built up early in the season. But again, that's life. Sometimes you want to have these arguments. Sometimes you want to brush it under the rug, as we kind of see in this moment here, and they're just appreciating the now. Now, back at the Rattlers Villa, we see Timothy making the drinks and finally coming to the conclusion to following through with his dark dreams and killing his family because he'll rather them all die, minus Lachlan, than face the consequences back home. Think about that. He would rather them all die with the idea of their father and husband being this man that has always provided for them and he is this Boy Scout in their eyes, more than being honest with them about the truth about his mistakes. That's just crazy to me. But unfortunately, some people do this. As we watch Timothy hand all of them drinks one by one, again except for Lachlan, as he gives this speech to his family.
I couldn't ask for a more perfect family. Job is to keep all that from you, to keep you safe.
Now, Saxon takes notice of how bad this smell is, and he doesn't want to drink it at first, but again, putting their trust in their father, Timothy convinces them that it's all good, and they trust him as they proceed to drink the poison. Now, after a few moments, we see Timothy gets regret over what he's decided to do as he watches them drinking and he knocks it out of Saxon's hand and he starts screaming,
Coconut milk's off. The coconut milk is off.
Okay, the coconut milk is off.
as he throws away the drinks, but he forgets to get rid of the poison that's sitting at the bottom of the blender. But one thing that is kind of unsatisfying to me is the show really never touched on the implications of what Timothy did. His decision was major, and that's something that he has to live with forever, and again, the show never really addressed that in my opinion. It is now morning and the last day of vacation as we enter into our third and final act of the finale, which gives us a bloody and tragic conclusion. We see Belinda can't sleep as she opens her computer, and we see this look of shock on her face as we'll later see that Greg did agree to their terms and gave her the full amount of $5 million. Now, I posed this question to my live audience the other night, and I want to pose the same question to you all. If this was you, What is the first thing you're doing if you woke up to $5 million in your bank account? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Now, we see the Hollanders have arrived, and we actually get some foreshadowing here from the bodyguards who's picking fun of Gaidak, who got hit in the head from the robbery. It's funny because both of them are about to get a headshot of their own soon. Gaidak speaks to his supervisor about the robbery, but here's where he keeps Valentina's friend's secret to himself, and he doesn't rat them out about the robbery. Now, as he tries to quit, we see his supervisor prevents him from doing so, and he tells him that he's a good worker and he's a good guy in general, and I think we can all agree that yes, Gaidak is a good guy, but I definitely don't think that he's good at his job. Now, back with Belinda, we see her celebrating with Zion, and she tells him how the conversation went between her and Greg. Now, Belinda and Zion are happy as hell, and rightfully so. I would be doing the same thing if I had that in my bank account right now. But she tells him that they're leaving Thailand ASAP because she doesn't want to be anywhere near Greg just in case he changes his mind. Again, morally, yes, taking the money isn't right, but narratively speaking, Belinda basically became another version of Tanya, and that's the thing to remember about this show. Most of all the characters from all the seasons are ultimately changed by the course of this vacation, and it's not a matter of good versus evil, but instead these characters that play within the morally gray areas of life. Now, while one parent sets forth their future plans for their child, we cut to seeing Timothy mistakenly leaving the blender out to Lachlan finally going to making his own smoothie. Now, personally, I'm not making any smoothies without cleaning out the blender first, especially when you had milk sitting in it overnight, but I'm to imagine that Lachlan didn't wash out the blender because he wanted to maybe get a taste of the alcohol from the night before that he wasn't able to drink. As we watch him make the poisonous smoothie and ultimately drinks it, as this is just the beginning of the end for some of our characters. Cut to Rick now with Chelsea eating as he gets seconds and he's caught by surprise by Jim, who tells him,
"You come into my house, lie to my wife, get the fuck out of here."
He proceeds to tell Rick that he remembered his mom and calls her a drunk and a slut and now a liar for making Rick think that his father was a great man. Now, obviously, we know what the reveal is of Jim being Rick's father later, but to speak to this moment of Jim basically poking the bear. To me, Jim and Rick are two of the same people. They allow their anger to get the best of them. I believe Jim was being hateful and honest at the same time, because him saying Rick's father, who we know to be as him, was a good guy, to me, that was him admitting to saying, I'm not a good guy. I'm not a good dad. You didn't miss out on anything. So he was being honest, but at the same time, he was also being mean and hateful, saying those bad things about Rick's mom. Now, Jim shows Rick his gun for protection as he returns back to the table completely broken as he tells Chelsea what just happened. Chelsea sees him slipping back to his old ways of allowing trauma to dictate his decision making as she tells him,
Stop worrying about the love you didn't get. Think about the love you have.
as Rick leaves the table to find Amrita in hopes that she'll help him calm him down. Meanwhile, back with Lachlan, we see the effects slowly set in as his family heads out, not knowing what's going on, as Lachlan begins throwing up and he starts slowly dying. We see Zion and Amrita meeting as this sets up the first scene of this season, but now we have the full context of the moment that lead up to that point. Now, Rick interrupts them and tries his best to get her to take a moment to talk to him, but she tells him that he's going to be okay and she's going to speak to him after her session. Again, I know we're all thinking this. If she would have told Zion, hey, give me 10 to 15 minutes, let me talk to this person for a little bit, that everything that transpires wouldn't have happened. But I remind you all what Chelsea said earlier, what's about to happen was bound to happen no matter what. We see Lachlan doing what he said he wasn't able to do weeks back when he was talking to his sister about him not being able to meditate because he couldn't focus and he couldn't see God. But that changes here as he sees the members of his family flash before his eyes. As we see Lachlan drowning in those waters that the monks spoke of to Timothy about dying being a homecoming, and as one soul returns to the waters where they began, as he technically is dying in this moment. As we see Timothy finally waking up to finding the blender has been used as he sees Lachlan outside unresponsive and him trying to wake his son up and screaming and yelling for help. Back with Rick, he takes notice of the ladies meeting Jim and preparing to take the photo. Rick takes notice that the bodyguards are just as bad at their job as Gaitak, and he sees his opportunity to get back at Jim. Meanwhile, we see Melinda lets Punchai know that she'll be leaving Thailand and she won't be starting a business with him, as she tells him,
Circumstances have changed for me, and I just can't commit to anything right now.
My first thought was immediately recalling what Tanya said to Belinda back in season 1, but now we see Belinda saying and doing the same thing to Punchai. Now, some of you all might feel a way about what she's doing, but like I felt all the way back in season 1, and I feel the same thing in this moment. Yes, broken promises and false hope sucks, but Tanya didn't owe Belinda anything, nor did Belinda owe Punchai anything as well. Back with Rick, both the bodyguards now out of the picture, and like a snake, he strikes. Rick begins walking towards Jim as Chelsea tries to stop him, but his mind is made up. As we watch, Rick takes Jim's gun and shoots him twice in the chest, and I didn't notice this on the first watch, but look how Lori didn't hesitate and turned into the Flash, and she was out of there after that first gunshot. Now we get to see the other characters reacting to the shots, and here's where we get the reveal that many of you all have predicted.
He's your father. He's your father. He told me. He's your father.
Now Rick doesn't have a second to process what he just heard, as the shots from the bodyguards are fired at him, and this is where Gaitak takes the gun and heads towards the action. Which, speaking of Gaitak, y'all remember those head jokes the bodyguards were saying towards him? Well, we see Rick's a great shot and he manages to shoot both of the bodyguards in the head. Now you notice that one of them falls in the water, and this being the body that Zion saw back in episode 1. As Rick kills both men, he turns around and sees that Chelsea got shot. The importance of this moment is the number 3. Rick shot Jim twice and Chelsea was shot once, equaling 3 shots. Now Rick shoots and kills 3 men, and remember what Chelsea said weeks back, bad luck comes in 3s. Rick and Chelsea's fate was already set in place ever since he didn't go shopping with her and she was held at gunpoint, which if you think about it, that was actually foreshadowing her being shot, and then getting bit by a snake, and this essentially being a metaphor for Rick being the snake that eventually became her poison. As Rick weeps and begs that she stay alive, but unfortunately, and this was a very sad moment and probably the most tragic death of any of the seasons, as we watch Chelsea dies. And calling back to foreshadowing earlier about them being together forever, we see Rick picking her up and he tells her,
I'm sorry. We're going to be together forever, okay?
As Gaitak arrives to a grieving Shatala who tells him to shoot and kill Rick. Feeling the pressure that's been built over the season and being told that he's a good guy, he doesn't have a killer instinct in him, and literally being yelled at to shoot, we watch, as many characters have done, which is putting their morals and beliefs aside in order to please everyone else, as Gaitak shoots and kills Rick. As we get this beautifully tragic shot of both Rick and Chelsea dead floating in the water, this being the yin and yang that Chelsea spoke of back in episode 7. But also taking into account the whole idea of this symbolizing what the monk said, which is you're returning back into the water to which you began. Now, just as Rick dies, we see Lachlan opens his eyes and he's alive. Again, this being the universe working in its mysterious ways, and this feeling like the death of Rick and the revival of Lachlan being a balancing of life happening, where a life for a new life happened and Lachlan gets a second chance at life. As Lachlan says,
I think I just saw God.
That being a callback to the conversation he had with Piper back in episode 2. As we end our final moments of the season where the Ratliffs are on the boat headed back home, and we get this really cool shot of this change of the children now all different. The see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil dynamic has completely changed. Saxon and Lachlan have found spirituality, and Piper realized she's not better or more enlightened than the rest of her family. Essentially all of them having been reborn. As they get their phones back, Saxon sees the messages and knows what happened back home as Timothy tells his family,
Things are about to change. We'll get through it as a family.
Now, my only complaint, as I mentioned earlier, about their story coming to an end was the fact that nobody seemed to question Lachlan almost dying after being poisoned. Are we to assume that Timothy and Lachlan have this secret that they're going to keep between them, or are they just not going to address how the poison ended up in his smoothie? Either way, we see Timothy at peace as he watches the water and hears the hymn that he sang as a child. Meanwhile, we see our friend group are trying to recover after the shooting and they're comforting one another. Back at Greg's house, he's throwing a party as Chloe's found their third wheel to fulfill his wish and he gets to live his life in peace for now, or does he? Is this the end of the Greg, Tanya, and Belinda story, or will we see them reviving the story in season 4? We get yet another set of criminals celebrating as the Russians are all together partying after successfully getting away with the robbery. As we see, Frank is back to being a Buddhist, and we also see Gaitak and Mook hugging, and it looks like she says something like "call me later" or "I'll see you later." Now, obviously, I'm no mouth reader, so I don't know if that's what she said to the Gaitak in this scene, but it appears that they may be dating at this point, as he is now the sole bodyguard of Shatala. Now, honestly, this could be a final goodbye between Mook and Gaitak. They might be leaving the hotel for good because obviously we know that Shatala lost her husband and she might not want to be at the hotel anymore. As we see the bodies of both Rick and Chelsea being loaded into a plane, we see Belinda and Zion waving goodbye to the staff of the White Lotus as Peng Chai looks sad as a puppy, and Belinda and Zion are set off to live their life together $5 million richer than when they started, as Belinda gets her happy ending. Now, a lot of my raw emotional opinions was said in my almost 2.5 hour live stream, so check that video out. But again, after a rewatch, I feel like I've come to terms with this finale, and I feel like it really did stick the landing for the most part. To me, a lot of my issues with this season was the supporting characters and the plots not feeling complete, and I feel like a lot was set up, but we didn't get that many payoffs. But in retrospect, that's how life kind of goes at points, right? But speaking to the overall story, a lot of the characters and the side plots and the side characters were in service of our main characters and served to purpose the overarching themes of the story. As we saw, both good and bad things sometimes happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people. Overall, a good and very close but not great season of The White Lotus. I've spoken on the pacing of the season not being an issue to me because it's very similar to the pace of the previous seasons, but again, my issue with this particular season was the overall feeling of a lot of the characters and the subplots not really feeling fulfilled and moments not having many payoffs. But I would say this season has some of the best acting of any season, some of the best monologues of any season, especially the monologue from Frank. It definitely had some questionable moments, but also more importantly, I would say that this is by far the darkest and most emotionally satisfying season of any of the seasons in my opinion. The Rick and Chelsea death was easily the saddest and most tragic death of any season, especially compared to how the other seasons were just essentially accidents. There you have it. That's my breakdown of the 8th and final episode of this 3rd season of The White Lotus. Now, I would imagine that season 4 will probably be on HBO in 2027 because that seems to be the timeline. Like there's 2 years before each season, and hell, I have no idea who's going to be in the next season, where the next season is going to take place, but I'm telling y'all right now, I can't wait. Now, if you all are still here at this point in the video, shout out to you all. I really appreciate the support, and I also really appreciate the support over the past 8 weeks of all my breakdowns and reviews of this season. And I want to give a special thanks to those who have been watching these videos since the very start of this series. Now, do me a favor and put in the comments right now, hashtag the coconut is off. Now, I plan on putting out more White Lotus videos throughout the week, including my rankings of the 3 seasons, so stay tuned for that. But please make sure to share your thoughts about the season overall, your thoughts about this finale, what worked, what didn't work, and also share your rankings of how you would rank all 3 seasons in the comments below. Now, if you all enjoy my breakdown, do me a favor, hit that like button, but also hit the share button. And also, if this is your first time watching one of my videos, I hope you had a good time. Consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. Now, if you all want to take the support even further, consider joining the channel memberships, but also check out my podcasts available on Spotify and Apple and where all podcasts can be found. Thank you again for Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget, you all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.